Chapter 57-28. He Zhonghai's eyes were fixed on Kong Shinmu as he released his soul consciousness to surround Kong Shinmu. After trying for a while, he was still unable to find out anything about Kong Shinmu. On the contrary, Kong Shinmu gave off an unfathomable aura. Moreover, Kong Shinmu easily avoided his supreme lightning and supreme wind power. Kong Shinmu's own supreme god power was at most at the 8th level. With his 9th stage supreme divine strength, how could he not be a match for an 8th stage supreme divine strength? While He Zhonghai was sizing up Kong Shinmu was also sizing up He Zhonghai. Relying on his powerful soul consciousness, Kong Shinmu was basically sure that He Zhonghai only had 2 types of supreme god power, supreme wind power and supreme lightning power. These 2 types of supreme god power had already reached the 9th level. Although the space barrier here had a kind of restriction on his power, combined with the position vortex and phantom vortex, He Zhonghai's power could still reach the height it should have. Kong Shinmu was also clear about the effect the evolved space barrier would have on the entire cave abode. Since he possessed the flame of the dead spirits and had already absorbed the flame of the dead spirits, his supreme divine flame had already evolved into the supreme divine flame. The essence of the space barrier was the flame of dead souls. With the supreme god flame, he would not be restricted by the space barrier. Kong Shinmu took advantage of this advantage to accurately control his power and take the initiative to attack He Zhonghai. The battle between the two gradually entered the space barrier. Coupled with the existence of He Zhonghai's position vortex, the two were completely separated from the cave abode. No matter what the situation of the battle between the two was, all the cultivators who entered the cave abode were unaware of it. This included Emoya. Although the battle was not far from her, she could not see the situation clearly. The only thing she could be sure of was that Kong Shinmu was not restricted by the space barrier. What Emoya was worried about was Kong Shinmu's supreme godly strength. Although Kong Shinmu's peerless divine strength had reached the 8th stage, compared to the 9th stage, the difference was like heaven and earth. It was not something that could be dealt with treasures. Moreover, sensing the subtle changes in the space in front of her, the thing that Emoya was worried about had come. Ever since Kong Shinmu stepped into the supreme god stage, the first supreme god power he chose to cultivate was the power of the supreme god flame. After that, he relied on actual combat and the continuous devouring of unparalleled divine power, allowing his unparalleled divine firepower to advance rapidly. Now the peerless godly flame of the 8th level had completely absorbed the power of the flame of the undead spirits and evolved into a peerless godly flame. Although the supreme divine spirit flame belonged to the supreme divine powers, it was far stronger than other supreme divine powers of the same level. Obtaining this power meant that his power had changed, and he would have to undergo a lightning tribulation. Now, the subtle changes in the space that Emoya sensed were the signs of a tribulation. Kong Shinmu needed to go into seclusion and continuously refine before he could fully grasp the power of the supreme divine spirit flame. Going into seclusion was a stage that every cultivator had to go through in order to advance their power. But now was not the time. If he was even slightly distracted now, he might encounter an unforeseen calamity. The thing that Emoya was worried about happened to Kong Shinmu. When Kong Shinmu displayed the supreme divine spirit flame just now, he sensed the changes in the meridians in his body. This feeling was that he was about to undergo a tribulation. The fluctuations in the aura around him also fell into He Zhonghai's perception. He Zhonghai laughed sinisterly. Kid, looks like even the heavens aren't willing to help you. Tribulation transcendence was something that cultivators looked forward to very much. As long as they went through a tribulation, it meant that their power would increase. But in this case, the tribulation might turn into a life and death tribulation. If they could withstand the pressure from He Zhonghai and successfully undergo the tribulation, they would survive. If they couldn't withstand the pressure and failed the tribulation, they would die. Kong Shinmu definitely wouldn't choose to undergo the tribulation at this time, but reality didn't allow it. His tribulation had come. Without hesitation, Kong Shinmu released the 8 God Star Plate, summoning Lu Zi and Big Guy. Thank you for your trouble. After saying that, Kong Shinmu sat down on the ground. The moment he sat down, layers of dark green flames appeared around him, surrounding his entire body. An aura that alternated between hot and cold suddenly spread out. Yes, Master. Lu Zi and Big Guy weren't strangers to He Zhonghai at all. Do you think you can stop me? He Zhonghai glanced at Lu Zi and Big Guy disdainfully. With that, he defeated the two of them. After quickly defeating the two, He Zhonghai quickly approached Kong Shinmu. Just as he was about to attack Kong Shinmu, he felt the pressure of the Supreme Divine Flame. It was clearly an 8th level Supreme Divine Power, but it was suppressing his 9th level Supreme Divine Power. This feeling made He Zhonghai very unhappy. Activating his soul consciousness, he condensed the 2 Supreme Divine Powers and approached Kong Shinmu. Unfortunately, when these 2 Supreme Divine Powers approached Kong Shinmu, they were blocked by the dark green aura surrounding Kong Shinmu. He Zhonghai naturally refused to believe it. A trivial 8th stage Supreme Divine Force. How could it block his 9th stage Supreme Divine Force? Furthermore, his peerless power of wind and peerless power of lightning were peerless saint attribute divine powers. Kong Shinmu's Supreme Divine Firepower was just a very ordinary Supreme Divine Power. Even if it advanced, its essence would not change, so there was nothing to fear. Thinking so, He Zhonghai once again used his Supreme Divine Power to deal with Kong Shinmu, who was meditating on the ground. This time, he approached Kong Shinmu, but all his attacks failed. Only then did he realize that Kong Shinmu had entered the spatial barrier. With the protection of the spatial barrier, he could not approach him. The power of magic had brought Kong Shinmu into the spatial barrier, so Kong Shinmu was naturally aware of it. Not only that, but he also controlled his power and quietly brought Emoya into the spatial barrier. He did not know how long it would take for him to transcend this tribulation, so he could not let Emoya be threatened. Kong Shinmu and Emoya both entered the spatial barrier. The 8-god star plate also followed Kong Shinmu into the spatial barrier. Lu Zi and the big guy were not He Zhonghai's opponents. After being defeated, they returned through the contract gate. He Zhonghai tried to use the 8-god star plate to enter the spatial barrier, but he saw that the contract gate was not closed. Immediately after, a shadow swept out from within. The aura this shadow exuded was very powerful. Although it was a creature from the other world, the strength of the cultivation it exuded was far beyond that of a supreme cultivator. He Zhonghai instinctively became vigilant. The shadow that swept out of the contract gate was Shen Guang. Shen Guang sensed that the environment of the 8-god star plate had changed dramatically, so he came out to check. Only then did he realize that the 8-god star plate had actually entered this spatial barrier. Shen Guang was naturally not unfamiliar with spatial barriers. However, he knew very well that the person who created this spatial barrier was not the dead spirit clan of the other world's 4 great corpse ancestor clans. The caster's technique was even more brilliant. Moreover, the spatial barrier he created was filled with rules. Chapter 57-29. You are. He Zhonghai had never seen Shenguang before, but he could faintly feel that the aura around Shenguang was very strong, very close to the 9th level of Divine Force realm. Star Eater was Everlasting Pavilion's disciple Hai Fan's summoning instrument. It wasn't that he didn't know Hai Fan, and he knew a thing or two about Hai Fan. Other than Big Head and Lu Zi, Hai Fan often summoned a creature from the other world called Cruel. Cruel was very strong, stronger than most of the Everlasting Pavilion's elders. He originally thought that Cruel was the strongest creature from the other world that Star Eater had signed a contract with. Unexpectedly, he saw a creature from the other world that was even stronger than Cruel. Shenguang. Shenguang glanced at He Zhonghai and said calmly, Shenguang. He Zhonghai's expression changed. He Zhonghai had heard of Shenguang before. Shenguang was the nightmare of the 4 ancestor corpse clans from the other world. 10,000 years ago in the other world, there was a huge event that shocked the entire world. It was a taboo existence in the other world. After that, the 4 ancestor corpse clans were divided. The person who caused that event was called Shenguang. This was something that He Zhonghai had heard when he was roaming the world. As for whether or not this Shenguang was that Shenguang, he couldn't prove his identity with just one sentence. He Zhonghai calmed his emotions and focused, once again sizing up Shenguang's cultivation. The aura that leaked out on the surface was indeed only at the 9th level of Divine Force realm. It wasn't enough to become the nightmare of the other world. Shenguang glanced at Kong Shinmu. Seeing that there was the aura of rules circulating around Kong Shinmu, he was surprised. After not seeing him for a while, Kong Shinmu's cultivation had actually reached such a level. His talent was really not bad. Kong Shinmu was currently in seclusion, and he didn't know what was happening in the outside world at all. As the power in his meridians circulated, his soul consciousness gradually condensed around his body. With the power of the seal, he formed a boundary, covering his entire body. Kong Shinmu was worried about Emoya, so he used his magical power to form a boundary to protect her. The moment the magical power was released, Shunguang's sharp senses sensed it. This was the magical power of the Star Atlas Lock, a kind of natural force. Once Kong Shinmu stepped into the Gate of Laws, it would signify that he would possess the power of the natural laws, the power of space. In other words, it was a type of space law. When that time came, as long as he grasped the space law seal, it would not be an exaggeration to say that no one would have a higher attainment than him in the aspect of space law. The moment the boundary formed by his soul consciousness enveloped Kong Shinmu, He Zhonghai sensed the existence of magic power. At this moment, He Zhonghai's face was terrifyingly gloomy. He thought that this kid Kong Shinmu was able to break through the power of the Dermic Might purely because he had the advantage of the Dermic seal. At most, he was just trying his luck to break through the power of the Dermic Might. Unexpectedly, Kong Shinmu has mastered the power of Dermic powers. Since that was the case, the second son must be eliminated. He Zhonghai unreservedly released his own power, causing the surrounding spatial barrier to tremble. The originally stable spatial barrier gradually began to operate due to the influence of He Zhonghai's power. Although the speed was very slow, the laws contained within it also began to operate. The laws of the spatial barrier began to operate, which meant that from this moment on, all cultivators who entered the cave abode had to abide by the laws of the spatial barrier. Otherwise, they would be lost within the laws of the spatial barrier. When the laws of the spatial barrier operated, many cultivators violated the laws and were sucked into it, getting lost within the spatial barrier. The spatial barrier was like a kind of boundary, separating the space of the cave abode from the outside world. This did not mean that the laws of the spatial barrier were absolute. Once this law was broken, they might face an even greater danger. In any space, once it was torn apart, the spatial storm within it would constantly emerge. The spatial storm was the strongest and most dangerous existence within the space. He Zhonghai did not care about anything and was determined to take down Kong Shinmu. However, he underestimated the boundary around Kong Shinmu. Moreover, this boundary seemed to be gradually strengthening. As Kong Shinmu's tribulation progressed, the boundary around him would only become stronger. He Zhonghai's eyes narrowed, and his hand gestures quickly changed. There were complex runes flashing from between his eyebrows. Some of the runes had already been imprinted on the boundary around Kong Shinmu. At this moment, the boundary clearly trembled a little. Seeing this, He Zhonghai sneered. "Do you really think that this level of boundary can protect you?" "You are." Shen Guang's eyes stared straight at the runes imprinted on the boundary. These runes exuded a powerful decomposing power, which was disintegrating the boundary. As the boundary trembled, the runes on it seemed to be growing stronger. No, the runes not only disintegrated the boundary, but also devoured the disintegrated part of the boundary to strengthen the power of the runes, which in turn accelerated the speed of decomposition. In this way, the boundary would be completely decomposed by the runes sooner or later. Moreover, by decomposing the runes of the boundary and devouring the power of the boundary, it would also become stronger. Although Kong Shinmu's boundary was continuously strengthening and the power of the runes was also increasing, it was very disadvantageous to Kong Shinmu. Shen Guang originally wanted to erase the runes on the boundary, but he found that his power had no effect on the runes. Instead, the runes seemed to have absorbed his power. "These runes are from the other world." Seeing Shen Guang's action, He Zhonghai sneered. His meaning was already very clear. Let Shen Guang not waste his energy, otherwise, it would only accelerate the speed of decomposition of Kong Shinmu's boundary. Shen Guang retracted his hand gestures, but he was still somewhat unwilling. Just as he was in a dilemma, he suddenly saw a beautiful figure sweep to Kong Shinmu's side. A pair of slender hands changed into a very common seal, which was a common seal gesture for erasing. After doing all this, Mo Ya's lily-white hands gently pressed on the boundary. The runes on the boundary all became transparent, and then disappeared. Mo Ya actually erased the runes on the boundary. Shen Guang couldn't help but take another look at Mo Ya. This woman had always been by the side of the 8 God Star Plates owner, Kong Shinmu. This was the first time he saw her ability. Mo Ya's erasing technique was very simple, and Shen Guang and He Zhonghai knew it too. Shen Guang couldn't erase the runes, but Mo Ya did it. The difference was in the two supreme divine power. Mo Ya's supreme divine power was supreme holy power. Using this power and her own technique, it was indeed easy to erase the runes. Worthy of being the person that I like. He Zhonghai was slightly surprised by the fact that Moya possessed supreme divine power. Of course, Moya only used her power to help Kong Shinmu erase the runes, which made He Zhonghai very angry. In the end, He Zhonghai transferred all his resentment to Kong Shinmu. You really talk a lot of nonsense. Moya's beautiful eyes focused, and she finally looked at He Zhonghai. In her beautiful eyes, there were waves of white mist surging. Then, Moya's lily-white hands changed into another seal, and a rune-like pattern appeared under her feet. This pattern looked simple, but it was a pattern that He Zhonghai had never seen before. The next moment, a similar pattern appeared under He Zhonghai's feet. Immediately, He Zhonghai felt that his movement was restricted. His attacks couldn't rush out of the range of the pattern. Moreover, there was the restriction of the space barrier here, which completely restricted He Zhonghai's movement. Without any reason, Moya used a teleportation technique on He Zhonghai. What kind of technique is this? He Zhonghai had naturally seen teleportation techniques before. They were techniques that used space to change the target's position. However, this was the first time he had seen a teleportation technique like Moya's. Before he could get a response, he was teleported away. Chapter 57:30. Shunguang was a being from the other world. Although Moya had never dealt with Shunguang before, she knew that he was a contracted being from the 8-god star plate. Knowing Shunguang's general situation, Shunguang's combat power far surpassed Kong Shinmu's. Moya was still afraid of Shunguang. Shunguang seemed to have read her mind, so he moved to the side. He didn't say much. He didn't explicitly say that he would protect Kong Shinmu during his tribulation, nor did he plan to return to the other world. He just stood there quietly. He Zhonghai had only been moved by Moya. He quickly found the route that Moya had moved and returned the way he had come. Returning the way he had come wouldn't trigger the rules of the space barrier and wouldn't be affected by the rules. Seeing He Zhonghai appear again, Moya's beautiful eyes narrowed. This guy seemed to be much more difficult to deal with than she had imagined. Miss, I won't hurt you. However, if you insist on protecting that kid, I might hurt you. He Zhonghai's tone was humble and polite when he faced Moya. Excuse me. As soon as he said that, several runes flew out of He Zhonghai's body again. The runes that appeared this time didn't look much different from the previous ones. What troubled Moya was that she couldn't erase these runes this time. Moreover, He Zhonghai didn't hold back this time. He released 2 types of supreme divine powers. As the peerless power of wind and peerless power of thunder fused together, there seemed to be some sort of nomological power mixed within. Such a powerful force directly attacked the boundary around Kong Shinmu. Moya didn't dare to be careless. She hurriedly gathered supreme divine power. Since she couldn't erase the other's power, she could at least weaken it. However, Shunguang was faster than her. He dashed forward and blocked the attack with his bare hands. Immediately, an extremely powerful force exploded from Shunguang's body and swept toward He Zhonghai. The 2 forces were similar in strength. Thus, they were in a stalemate, forming a relatively static state. Moya's beautiful eyes stared at the place where the 2 forces collided. The small space formed by the static state didn't just open the door to the other world. It also opened the door to other worlds. Vaguely, Moya felt a mysterious and familiar force. The static state only lasted for a moment before it was broken. Both of them took a few steps back, and soon, they were engaged in a fight. At that moment, within the boundary, Kong Shinmu, who was undergoing his tribulation, also felt an aura that was different from the other world. It was an extremely unfamiliar aura, but it was the 7 Devouring Demon Sealing Art seal. The seal of the 7 Devouring Demon Sealing Art, which had been in a closed state all this time, suddenly opened at this moment, and then released a devouring power. The devouring power released by the 7 Devouring Demon Sealing Art swept out in all directions. This was an invisible power, and Jiang Shenwu could only sense its existence with his soul consciousness. With his current soul consciousness, he could only sense the devouring power released by the 7 Devouring Devil Sealing Art spreading out and condensing at the point where He Zhonghai's and the Divine Light's powers collided. Following the brief pause of this devouring power, Jiang Shenwu could clearly sense that the aura of the remnant of the 7 Devouring Devil Sealing Art had grown a bit stronger. Vaguely, it seemed like it was going to advance. Now, Kong Shinmu was sure that the brief moment when Guang and He Zhonghai's powers collided was a door to another world. Other than the other world, there must be a higher world. In that world there were many rules. Although the door had only opened for a moment, it was still captured by the 7 Devouring Demon Sealing Art seal. It activated and released the 7 Devouring Demon Sealing Art's devouring power, absorbing all the rules. After absorbing the rules behind the door, the first level of the 7 Devouring Demon Sealing Art seal became more stable. The door closed after Guang and He Zhonghai fought again. However, the 7 Devouring Demon Sealing Art's devouring power didn't retract. Instead, it continued to spread forward. Kong Shinmu released more of his Guang. He released the 7 Devouring Demon Sealing Art's devouring power. Not long after, the 7 Devouring Demon Sealing Art's devouring power approached the space barrier. After coming into contact with the space barrier, it seemed to sense the rules it contained. It spread along the space barrier at a speed that Kong Shinmu's Guang couldn't capture. This cave abode wasn't big, but it was affected by the space barrier. It expanded infinitely. Kong Shinmu's Guang couldn't cover the entire cave abode with his Guang. Since his Guang couldn't capture the 7 Devouring Demon Sealing Art's devouring power, Kong Shinmu didn't retract his Guang. Instead, he focused on his surroundings. The mysterious cultivator who set up the space barrier was definitely still in this space. He couldn't be careless. In reality, the mysterious cultivator who set up the space barrier was the white figure that Kong Shinmu saw when he entered the cave abode. His name was Hao Yan, and he was a disciple of the Shao Yun sect. He was also in the cave abode. Hao Yan moved the cave abode to the surface and released the space barrier. He wanted to refine the cave abode into a spatial artifact. He didn't move the cave abode to this place randomly. It was within his calculations. The place he chose was where the door to the parallel world was. Hao Yan's goal was to open that door and use the rules of the space barrier to refine a spatial artifact that could lead to the alternate world. In other words, it was an artifact that was similar to the star map lock. This kind of artifact was different from the star map lock. The star map lock was limited by the wielder's cultivation and the wielder's soul consciousness. It could also be understood that the distance or the degree of space that the star map lock could teleport was limited by the wielder's soul consciousness. The artifact that Hao Yan refined didn't have such a rule. As long as one understood the rules of the space barrier, one could control the artifact. Hao Yan sensed the devouring power released by Kong Shinmu's 7 Devouring Demon Sealing Art when it spread through the space barrier. However, Hao Yan was currently trying to open the door to the alternate world, so he couldn't leave for a while. Ever since Hao Yan entered the cave abode, he had changed the space barrier's layout several times just to open that door. For some reason, he could only sense the door, but he couldn't open it. This state continued for a period of time. Suddenly, Hao Yan sensed an extremely powerful force spreading through the spatial barrier. Then, the door opened. Although it only opened for a moment, Hao Yan seized the opportunity. He controlled his power, opened the door, and entered. He Zhonghai and the power of the divine light continued to collide, but the special door didn't open again. After Hao Yan entered the door, it meant that he had left the cave abode and the space barrier. The devouring power engraved by the 7 Devouring Demon Sealing Art circled the entire space barrier once before quickly withdrawing. The devouring power of the 7 Devouring Demon Sealing Art had already devoured all the rules of the space barrier. As for how strong the rules of the space barrier were, Kong Shinmu didn't have a clear idea. It wasn't until now that the 7 Devouring Demon Sealing Art had devoured these rules that he successfully entered the second stage. Only then did Kong Shinmu realize how strong the rules of the space barrier were. Chapter 57:31. The spatial barrier that had lost its laws still existed. Although the laws within it had been devoured, the spatial barrier was still a type of spatial spell technique. Without the restrictions of the laws, it had completely transformed into an ordinary spatial spell technique. The cultivators who had entered by mistake were no longer restricted by the laws. They only needed to break the spatial barrier to leave this cave abode. However, Hao Yan's spatial barrier technique had evolved from the flame of dead spirits. Apart from the spatial storm, there was also the flame of dead spirits in the damaged space. There were even some living beings from the other world sealed in certain places, such as some clansmen of the Corpse Ancestor clan. Many cultivators had already encountered the clansmen of the Corpse Ancestor clan. Kong Shinmu's soul consciousness had also sensed the many cultivators who had entered the spatial barrier by mistake. This time, he had finally witnessed what it meant by there were as many supreme cultivators as there were hairs on a cow. What was certain was that most of the cultivators who had come here were cultivators from other realms. Compared to these cultivators, Kong Shinmu had more or less a rough estimate of the Everlasting Pavilion's deterrent power. The Everlasting Pavilion was not something that he could contend with on his own. The only thing he could do now was to successfully transcend the tribulation. The moment his soul consciousness was released, the power of the supreme holy ice domain that had been dormant in his sea of consciousness for a long time was also released. It gradually merged with the barrier around Kong Shinmu's body, completely isolating Kong Shinmu from the outside world. From the outside world's perspective, Kong Shinmu was sitting on the ground, motionless. The aura around him was also in a state of stillness. On the other hand, Kong Shinmu was situated in a white world. This aura was the power of the supreme holy ice domain. During the tribulation, he had unintentionally released the supreme holy ice domain. There was also the power of nature mixed with the power of space. These two types of powers that Kong Shinmu could not control were released at the same time, which indeed surprised Kong Shinmu. Although surprised, Kong Shinmu seized the time to refine these powers. Under the effect of these two powers, the seal began to become more complete and approached Kong Shinmu's supreme power. The seal that was originally the core of the star map was limited to controlling the power of space. At this moment, as Kong Shinmu's power of space and the power of the supreme holy ice domain continued to evolve, it also began to change. The power of the star map core seal had completely transformed into the power of the seal with the power of space. This also meant that Kong Shinmu had mastered the power of space. Although he had only grasped the basics of the supreme spatial force, Jiang Shenwu was still able to fully unleash the power of the supreme spatial force with the power of the seal. As for the power of the supreme holy domain, it was a power of supreme power of space. This was the power that Jiang Shenwu had devoured when a holy artifact of heaven and earth had perished. Since he had not grasped the power of the supreme holy ice, he could not unleash the power of the supreme holy ice domain. As Kong Shinmu mastered the power of space, the power of the supreme holy ice domain gradually merged with the power of space. As Kong Shinmu mastered the power of space, the power of the supreme holy ice domain gradually merged with it. This was actually not a good thing for Kong Shinmu. If the power of the supreme holy ice domain merged with the power of space, then he, who had mastered the power of the supreme holy ice, would not be able to condense the power of the supreme holy ice domain. When that happened, the power of the supreme holy ice domain that had merged with the power of space would also affect the condensation of the power of the supreme holy ice domain. This was what Kong Shinmu was worried about. However, this did not stop the fusion of the two powers. As he released his consciousness, the speed at which the two powers merged increased. Very soon, Kong Shinmu realized something. Although the power of the supreme holy ice domain and the power of space had merged, he could still sense the existence of these two powers. The power of the fusion was affected by the seal. After the two powers merged, it was equivalent to producing a new power. This power was essentially the power of the seal. Although Kong Shinmu could use the power of space, he still could not comprehend the power of the supreme holy ice. This also meant that he could not control the power of the supreme holy ice domain. After mastering the power of space, Kong Shinmu had a rough understanding of his own power. The first power that he comprehended was the power of the supreme divine fire. The power of the supreme divine fire was also the first power that was close to the 9th level. Later on, under the effect of the flame of dead spirits, it evolved into the supreme spiritual fire. The supreme flame of divinity stopped at the 9th level and didn't advance any further. Even though Kong Shinmu absorbed the power of fire in the universe, the supreme spiritual fire did not improve at all. On the contrary, the power of the supreme holy land, the power of the supreme dark iron, the power of the supreme soul, and the power of space that he had just comprehended started to improve. All this while, Kong Shinmu mainly cultivated the power of the supreme divine fire and neglected to cultivate these powers. Until now, when the supreme spiritual fire reached the 9th level, it stopped. The remaining supreme divine power began to absorb the natural power of the supreme divine power in the world, as well as the corresponding elemental power in the surrounding space. After a type of power reached the 9th level, theoretically, it would gradually come into contact with the rules, and cross the door of rules to explore the rules corresponding to the power of nature. Then it would step into the realm of rules. However, until now, Kong Shinmu's supreme spiritual fire did not improve at all. Kong Xinmu had never heard of such a situation, let alone experienced it himself. He could not help but think of a possibility. He would only step into the realm of laws when all of his supreme godly powers reached the 9th level? If that was really the case, he would face another problem. He possessed more than a dozen types of supreme divine powers, and he only needed to cultivate all of them to the 9th level. Or could it be that there were still other types of supreme divine powers? It seemed that after reaching the supreme level, the system he cultivated gradually changed. Could it be that he was affected by the power of the supreme holy ice territory? Or was it affected by the power of devouring? As for the answer to this question, Kong Xinmu did not know. What he needed to do now was to refine the other types of power. Only then would he be able to get an accurate answer. Time passed just like that. Kong Xinmu's tribulation continued. Just like that, a year passed. In a year, the boundary around Kong Xinmu became stronger and stronger. Not only did the boundary protect Kong Xinmu, but it also protected Moya tightly. Kong Xinmu spent a year in seclusion while he Zhonghai and the Divine Light fought for a year. After a year, there was still no clear winner between the two. No one was more surprised than he Zhonghai. The living beings of the other world use their own power to pass through the door. Staying here for a long time will only weaken your power. How can you still have power? He Zhonghai could not understand this. Chapter 57-32. He Zhonghai narrowed his eyes and did not respond to the Divine Light directly. In a year, Divine Light had more or less figured out He Zhonghai's background. He had the same bloodline inheritance as Gufeng, which was the power of replication. Not long ago, it once again displayed its regenerative ability. The regenerative ability was not a kind of supreme divine power. Just like the replication ability, it was a special power inherited from the bloodline that was comparable to supreme divine power. However, the regenerative ability came from the Lost Clan, the Yuan family. Although they were both great hidden families, compared to the Nangong family, there was no information about the Yuan family in the world. The Yuan family was like a family that only existed in legends. No one knew where they were and no one had any traces of the Yuan family. Of course, there might be descendants of the Yuan family in this world, but under normal circumstances, no one would be able to discover them. One thing that could be confirmed was that the regenerative ability originated from the Yuan family. It was an inherited power of the Yuan family. However, the ability to regenerate was not inherited from the Yuan family's bloodline. As for what kind of power was inherited from the Yuan family's bloodline, there was no relevant explanation in later generations. What was certain was that the regenerative ability was an inherited power. Therefore, even if the Yuan family was hidden somewhere in the world, they would still find a suitable candidate to inherit the regenerative ability. He Zhonghai possessed the ability to regenerate, so he might be the successor of the Yuan family. In other words, He Zhonghai had someone who could contact the Yuan family. Why are you protecting that person? He Zhonghai paused and asked. Answer my question first. Shen Guang glanced at Kong Xinmu and said in a deep voice. As you can see, I have a regenerative ability. He Zhonghai sneered. He naturally knew what Shen Guang was thinking. But so what if he had the ability to regenerate? You know the whereabouts of the Yuan family? The Divine Light pursed her lips and asked. What do you think? He Zhonghai gave a thought-provoking answer. Divine Light was actually not interested in the Yuan family. It just did not want Kong Xinmu to have a grudge with the Yuan family. After all, if they became enemies, Kong Xinmu alone would not be able to contend against the Yuan family. Of course, Kong Xinmu was a member of the Dragon God clan, which was also a famous clan. However, the Yuan family could not be underestimated. The Yuan family was an untouchable existence. Shen Guang didn't ask anything else, but he naturally wouldn't back down. He wouldn't let He Zhonghai disturb Kong Xinmu's closed-door training. He Zhonghai had the regenerative ability, which gave him the ability to fight for a long time. For the past year, He Zhonghai had relied on his regenerative ability to survive until now. Moreover, not only did his strength not weaken, but he became even more valiant as he fought. He Zhonghai was no stranger to the Yuan family that Divine Light mentioned. However, this only made him more curious about the Yuan family. The regenerative ability he possessed did indeed come from the Yuan family, but it was not inherited from the Yuan family. Instead, it was inherited from someone else. The person who passed on the regenerative ability to him briefly mentioned the Yuan family and did not mention them again. In the sect, Yuan family was also a taboo word. It's been a year. It's about time for you to go back. He Zhonghai gathered his power and approached the divine light again. Shen Guang saw He Zhonghai's expression and reaction just now. He roughly knew that He Zhonghai didn't interact with the Yuan family members and was not very interested in him. Shen Guang's strength was beyond He Zhonghai's expectations. He used his own cultivation to pass through the door of the contract and came to this world where he couldn't recover his own ability for as long as a year. However, he had already stayed for a year. It was indeed time for him to go back. Shen Guang could clearly feel that the aura around He Zhonghai's body had suddenly become stronger. In the past year, every time He Zhonghai was defeated, his strength would increase. It grew exponentially. Until now, his regenerative ability was getting stronger. Even Emoya could feel the strong power around He Zhonghai. All this while, she had been protecting Kong Shinmu. Now that she sensed the aura around He Zhonghai's body, she was shocked. Be careful. Emoya's beautiful eyes focused. Her slender jade-like hands quickly formed a seal. With her as the center, the seal spread out in all directions. At this moment, the surrounding space was invaded by waves of white light. He Zhonghai's attack was slightly stagnant. Although the stagnation only lasted for a short while, it didn't weaken. It swept toward Shen Guang while heading toward Kong Shinmu. Emoya had been paying attention to Kong Shinmu. She stood out immediately, wanting to block the attack for Kong Shinmu. However, the moment she approached, the barrier around her shattered inch by inch. Don't! Shen Guang saw this and hurriedly shouted. It was undeniable that Emoya's ability to remove negative elements was very strong. However, it wasn't enough to block He Zhonghai's attack. The regenerative ability that he had displayed was a genuine inherited power of the Yuan family. The regenerative ability could regenerate all of one's strength and strengthen it by several times. It could be said to be a very strong auxiliary power. Emoya was naturally aware of the strength of He Zhonghai's strength. However, she couldn't ignore Kong Shinmu. As soon as Shen Guang said this, he suddenly dashed forward and blocked He Zhonghai's attack personally. However, he also paid a price for this. He Zhonghai sent him back to the Gate of Contract. Being sent back to the Gate of Contract meant that he wouldn't be able to pass through the Gate of Contract for a long time and wouldn't be able to come to this world. He Zhonghai glanced at Emoya coldly. He didn't retract his hand gesture. His target was Kong Shinmu. His power was also locked on to Kong Shinmu. Even if Emoya blocked in front of him, his attack would still avoid Emoya. This space rampart originally had its own rules. However, since a year ago, the rules in the space rampart had been flowing away. Until now, the space rampart was basically not bound by the rules. Without the restrictions of the rules, He Zhonghai's phantom vortex could operate to the maximum. He could control the power to attack whoever he wanted. Even if the attack deviated from its original trajectory, it could still hit the target that he had locked onto. Emoya naturally understood the power of He Zhonghai's phantom vortex. Without the rules of the space rampart, it also lost the most crucial power of the space rampart, binding. He would definitely target all of his attacks on Kong Shinmu. Since that was the case, all of his flaws would be exposed. Emoya's figure dashed forward. She wanted to attack He Zhonghai and weaken his attack. However, just as she was about to move, the space around her solidified layer by layer, forming a prison that trapped her inside. Emoya immediately used a spell to erase the prison's restrictions. She was very fast, and the speed at which the prison solidified was also very fast. After this cycle repeated 3 times, Emoya clearly felt that the prison had become even stronger. If she wanted to remove the prison again, she would have to expend a lot of her soul consciousness. Moreover, before she could remove the prison, it would be restored again. Miss, I'll have to trouble you for now. He Zhonghai glanced at Emoya. His attack had already reached the front of Kong Shinmu's barrier. With his current power, the result of facing Kong Shinmu's barrier was that Kong Shinmu's barrier was like a piece of paper. It crumbled in an instant. I was wondering how capable you were. He Zhonghai laughed coldly. Chapter 57-33. Jiang Shenwu's figure was nowhere to be seen behind the inch-by-inch shattered barrier. Moreover, there was not even a trace of Kong Shinmu's aura. Not only in the barrier, but even around the barrier, including the surrounding space, there was no trace of Kong Shinmu's aura. Suddenly, He Zhonghai seemed to have thought of something. His eyes narrowed, and he looked at Mo Ya. Mo Ya's figure also suddenly disappeared. What the hell was going on? Ever since the rules in the space barrier disappeared, the phantom vortex was no longer affected. It was no exaggeration to say that no one in the cave mansion could escape his perception when they used spatial techniques. However, at this moment, Kong Shinmu had disappeared into thin air. Not only could he not sense any spatial technique Kong Shinmu used, but he also could not sense when Mo Ya had left. He Zhonghai calmed his mind and used the phantom vortex technique. In a year's time, his phantom vortex spell had been refined to the large success stage. In just a breath's time, it spread across the entire space of the cave mansion. He Zhonghai did not let go of any corner. He was determined to find Kong Shinmu and Mo Ya. At this time, in the space not far from He Zhonghai, in front of a stone table in a secret room in the cave mansion, Kong Shinmu put Mo Ya down. Kong Shinmu. Mo Ya was a little surprised. When she sensed Kong Shinmu using the technique, she felt that she had passed through layers of space. When the pressure from the space disappeared, she arrived at this place. This secret room was the one where they first found the star map lock. Senior, I have comprehended the supreme spatial force. Kong Shinmu moved his shackles and said with a smile. He had gained a lot from this heavenly tribulation. Not only did his cultivation base improve, but he had also mastered the supreme spatial force. Supreme spatial force? Mo Ya was a little surprised. In a year, Kong Shinmu had comprehended the supreme spatial force. Not only was he talented, but he also had a good comprehension ability. Yes, although I've only comprehended part of it, it's not difficult to deal with the spatial barrier. As he spoke, Kong Shinmu glanced in one direction. That was where He Zhonghai was. He Zhonghai's phantom vortex is also a kind of space-type magic art. I had thought that my supreme spatial energy would not be able to contend against it, but now it seems that it can surpass the range of the phantom vortex's perception. Kong Shinmu pondered over the opposites within. Looking at He Zhonghai's posture, he didn't seem to have noticed his departure. Since that was the case, the realm of this supreme spatial energy was not weak. However, even though he had avoided He Zhonghai's senses, he was still unable to leave this space barrier for a while. There were countless spatial barriers in this cave. Later on, they gathered together, causing some changes to the entire cave. Take this secret room for example. It was originally just a secret room with a star map lock. Due to the changes in the space rampart, the space here also changed and gradually became like a space rampart. On the surface, the space rampart was like a barrier, but in reality, it was a kind of conceptual substance. Just like Gufeng's space division, a cultivator could still divide the space layer by layer even when they were in space. This was because space was a conceptual existence. The same went for space ramparts. They were all conceptual existences. It looked like a thin layer of space rampart, but in reality, its thickness was unimaginable. If he wanted to leave this cave, he would have to pass through layers of space ramparts. He Zhonghai was not far from the secret room, but if he wanted to use the phantom vortex to find this place, he would have to pass through layers of space ramparts to lock onto Kong Shinmu and Mo Ya's traces. Of course, Kong Shinmu knew that he could not leave the cave yet. Moreover, he had to fight He Zhonghai. He had snatched the star map lock, and he had not gotten it back yet. There was one more thing that he could not forget. He Zhonghai coveted Mo Ya, so he must not let him go. Senior, after I comprehended the supreme spatial energy, I realized that there's something strange about this secret room. Kong Shinmu came to the table in the room. The star map lock had originally been placed on this table. At that time, the star map lock had been enveloped by dermic power, and any cultivator would have stopped in their tracks. Kong Shinmu knew that Tang Xiaoyu had helped him obtain the dermic seal, and he had benefited from Tang Xiaoyu's luck. Successfully comprehending the dermic seal was also a kind of opportunity. He had used the dermic seal to break the dermic power on the star map lock, and the star map lock had been snatched away by He Zhonghai. At that time, Kong Shinmu only cared about chasing after the star map lock, but he had neglected the table with the star map lock. This table was also a type of dermic artifact, and it seemed to be a space-type dermic artifact. The cultivator who had moved this cave out had realized that this table was a dermic artifact, so he had moved it out together with Mo Ya. This is... Emoya only noticed this table after Kong Shinmu reminded her. She touched the table, and her eyes suddenly lit up. Senior, what's wrong? Kong Shinmu noticed the change in Emoya's expression, and he was a little curious. This seems to be a raw material for refining a space-type dermic artifact. Emoya was very certain. Keep this first, it will definitely be useful in the future. Senior, you're right, but I don't think I can keep this thing. Kong Shinmu tried, but he could not keep it into his space storage bag. Do you understand what to do next? Emoya smiled gently and said, Yes. Kong Shinmu laughed bitterly. He had to get the star map lock back. Speaking of which, he had not been able to contact Ao Tong's puppet ever since he had entered the sealed mystic realm. He had to get the star map lock back as soon as possible. So it's here. At this time, He Zhonghai's phantom whirlpool had finally passed through the layers of space barriers and arrived at this secret room. Although he said it casually, He Zhonghai was very surprised. Kong Shinmu and Emoya were so close to each other, but he did not notice them at all. Especially when Kong Shinmu used his sorcery, the surrounding space did not fluctuate at all. As soon as he finished speaking, He Zhonghai's figure swept over. As soon as he arrived, his eyes fell on the stone table that was placed on the side. With just a glance, He Zhonghai noticed that the stone table was different. Without any hesitation, he put the stone table away. Kong Shinmu and Emoya were stunned. He Zhonghai put the stone table away? He must have a high-level space-type dermic artifact. I thought you would be able to do something after a year of closed-door cultivation. You're just a... He Zhonghai put the stone table away, and he did not forget to insult Kong Shinmu. It's good that you put it away. Saves me the trouble, Kong Shinmu said with a straight face. He Zhonghai was infuriated. He didn't say a word and directly attacked. The aura that leaked out from his body directly blew up the entire secret room. Even the surrounding secret rooms were not spared. The aura was so majestic that even the surrounding space was shattered. Chapter 57-34. The cultivators who came here were all aiming for the Star Atlas Lock. Due to the existence of the magic force, they were unable to obtain the Star Atlas Lock for a while, so they all set out to find a way to break the magic force. Of course, the disciples of the four sects were all aware of the existence of the seal. After knowing about the existence of the magic force, they focused on finding the seal. The only way to break the magic force on the Star Atlas Lock was to find the core of the Star Atlas Lock, which was the seal. A year had passed, but no one had found the seal. At some point in time, a clue regarding the traces of the Dharma seal was revealed. It was said that the people from the Wuji Pavilion had obtained the seal and broken the magic force. Now they were going to take the Star Atlas Lock. Recently, all the cultivators who entered this place rushed into the cave abode and passed through layers of space barriers just to find the Star Atlas Lock. He Zhonghai released his power at this time. In the eyes of other cultivators, they only thought that a certain powerhouse had come to fight for the Star Atlas Lock. However, there were some powerhouses who accurately determined He Zhonghai's identity based on his unique aura the moment he released his power. Hence they all rushed here. The four sects, as the representatives of the powerhouses in the outer region, also played a leading role. Indeed, when everyone saw the people from the four sects heading to the secret room of the cave abode, they followed their footsteps one after another. Although it was impossible to snatch the Star Atlas Lock from the hands of the people from the four sects, following them to see the world might be able to gain some benefits. Among the mixed crowd, there was no lack of the existence of extremely powerful powerhouses. For example, Song Yu. Song Yu had actually sensed the aura leaked when He Zhonghai and Shengguang fought a long time ago. It was one thing to sense it, but it was really difficult to find the place of the fight. Moreover, Song Yu knew He Zhonghai and knew his identity, so she did not intend to have anything to do with He Zhonghai. Recently, she heard that the people from the Wuji Pavilion obtained the seal, broke the magic force, and took the Star Atlas Lock. Currently, there was only He Zhonghai from the Wuji Pavilion here, so it was certain that He Zhonghai must have taken the Star Atlas Lock. There were many people who had the same idea as Song Yu, but no one wanted to stand out. They all wanted to be the fishermen who took advantage of the situation. Thus, the cultivators who came here first all stayed in one place and observed the situation. The people of the four major sects, including those from the Wuji Pavilion, arrived one after another. With He Zhonghai making such a scene, Kong Shinmu also had a premonition of what would happen next. When he brought Moya to this place, he had already circulated the supreme power of space. The supreme spatial energy contained the characteristics of the supreme sacred ice domain, and it could create a new space out of thin air. Although the created space was not suitable for cultivators or other living creatures, it was enough to deal with He Zhonghai. When He Zhonghai appeared, he didn't know that he had already entered the control of Kong Shinmu's supreme spatial force. When He Zhonghai used the illusory vortex again, he finally realized this. Power of space? He Zhonghai still thought that it was just an ordinary power of space, and he didn't think that Kong Shinmu had comprehended the supreme spatial energy. It wasn't that he hadn't fought with Kong Shinmu before, so he was no stranger to the supreme divine power that Kong Shinmu possessed. Kong Shinmu wasn't an ordinary cultivator with twin supreme divine power, but he possessed several types of supreme divine power. For example, the power of the supreme holy land, the supreme soul power, and the evolved power of the supreme divine fire were displayed earlier. Vaguely, there seemed to be a type of supreme divine power. Every supreme cultivator would be able to comprehend the supreme divine power corresponding to their talent power. Before that, they had to step into the supreme divine power. In other words, they had to devour a type of supreme divine power and comprehend the corresponding supreme divine power. At this point it was basically set. The cultivator had to cultivate the supreme divine power and reach the peak of the supreme divine power. It was also the so-called 9th level of the supreme divine power realm. And the supreme divine power level 9 cultivators would sense the rules corresponding to their talent, and once they stepped into the gate of rules, they would reach the realm of rules. He Zhonghai was in this state now. The supreme divine power level 9 realm. He could clearly sense the situation of Kong Shinmu's supreme divine power. Because of this, his view of Kong Shinmu had changed. He always thought that Kong Shinmu was just lucky, but he didn't expect that Kong Shinmu possessed several types of supreme divine power. Without a strong enough comprehension ability and a strong soul consciousness, it was impossible to control so many supreme divine power at the same time. With Kong Shinmu's strong comprehension ability, it was naturally very normal for him to have a type of power of space. When they really fought, He Zhonghai realized that the space around him wasn't as simple as he thought. Also, Kong Shinmu's supreme divine power seemed strange. No matter what kind of power of space it was, He Zhonghai sealed the surrounding space. To Kong Shinmu, what He Zhonghai was doing now was just the surface strength. After a year's time, his supreme divine power had improved, especially his supreme god spiritual flame, which had been greatly strengthened. Originally, his supreme god spiritual flame had already reached the 8th level. The reason why it was so hard to break through to the 9th level was because some changes had occurred. After this closed-door cultivation, it had reached the 9th level. The strength of the 9th level supreme god spiritual flame far surpassed He Zhonghai's 9th level supreme divine power. Also, at the same time, Kong Shinmu's other supreme divine powers had also greatly strengthened. The only thing that didn't change was probably the supreme divine power of the soul. It seemed that the advancement of the supreme divine power of the soul was inextricably linked to the soul consciousness. Kong Shinmu's soul consciousness was many times stronger than cultivators of the same level. Because his soul consciousness was very strong, it was very difficult for him to continue cultivating. This also caused his supreme divine power of the soul to be unable to improve. Fortunately, he had comprehended the power of space. The strengthening of the soul consciousness, other than the continuous strengthening of one's own cultivation, also needed to be tempered. Only in this way, the strength of the soul consciousness would be strengthened in a practical sense. Of course, there was the possibility that there were some special cultivation methods for the soul consciousness. Supreme cultivators couldn't blindly cultivate this kind of mental cultivation method. Otherwise, it would interfere with the understanding of the supreme domain power. Also, one couldn't be too hasty in cultivation. Being too hasty would often result in irreversible consequences. In short, it was extremely easy for the current Kong Shinmu to deal with He Zhonghai. Especially with the power of space in hand, it was very difficult for He Zhonghai to touch him. Instead, He Zhonghai used the illusory vortex technique to trap himself in space. Supreme Divine Power Level 9 Realm. Chapter 5735. In a year's time, Kong Shinmu's supreme divine power had reached such a terrifying level. The realm of Supreme Divine Power Level 8 was an existence that was difficult to surpass for cultivators below the realm of Level 8. It was not an exaggeration to say that a cultivator who had reached the 8th level of Supreme Divine Power could easily crush any cultivator below the 8th level. And there was an insurmountable gap between the 8th and the 9th level of the Supreme Divine Power realm. Just like breaking through to the Supreme Superior level, not only did it require an extremely strong comprehension, but it also required the absorption of the existing Supreme Divine Power, combined with the cultivator's own talent, to reach the Supreme Superior level. If there were any mistakes during this process, they would be consigned to eternal damnation. This was the difference between the 8th and 9th level of the Supreme Divine Power realm. The difference was that breaking through to the 9th level did not require the absorption of the corresponding Supreme Divine Power. It all depended on one's own comprehension. Among all this, the most important thing was the Supreme Territory Power. Only the Supreme Divine Power that could unleash the Supreme Territory Power could produce the corresponding rules. It could be said that the 9th level of Supreme Divine Power was preparation for the rules. Kong Shin-mu had already comprehended the 9th level. Even though He Zhonghai's Supreme Divine Power had already reached the 9th level, he still believed that Kong Shin-mu could not break through to the 9th level in a short period of time. But now, in front of him, Jiang Xinwu had indeed reached the 9th stage. "Isn't it time to return my things?" Kong Shin-mu's eyes narrowed as he said in a low voice. "Come and take it if you can." He Zhonghai knew the main purpose of coming to the secret realm. It was not just the everlasting pavilion. The other sects were also here for the star map lock. Even though they had already obtained the star map lock, there was still one more important thing to do before leaving. The kid in front of him, Kong Shin-mu, was holding Hai Fan's summoning instrument, Star Devour. No, it should be the 8-God Star Plate. He Zhonghai could not help but feel disappointed in Hai Fan. Hai Fan had possessed Star Devourer a long time ago, but the people of Everlasting Pavilion only knew that it was Hai Fan's summoning Dharma artifact. They didn't know that it was the 8-God Star Disc. No matter what, he had to get the 8-God Star Plate back. He Zhonghai and Kong Shin-mu fought again. Both of their Supreme Divine Powers had reached the 9th level. It was fine if they didn't make a move, but once they did, it was earth-shattering. In the end, the cave couldn't hold on and collapsed. The cave had collapsed, and the entire place was in a mess. However, the spatial barrier that enveloped the entire cave was still there. Even if their attacks broke through the spatial barrier would quickly shift and be repaired. In short, their current attacks were unable to completely break through the spatial barrier. The cultivators who entered the cave abode were completely trapped in the spatial barrier after the cave abode was destroyed. It was also at this time that many cultivators realized the scope of the space barrier. In addition, the battle between Kong Shin-mu and He Zhonghai was constantly moving. Broken spatial barriers were everywhere. Some of the spatial barriers could not be repaired in time, and spatial cracks would appear. Although these spatial cracks were connected to the outside world of the cave abode, they were affected by the spatial storm. It was difficult for ordinary cultivators to cross them. The creator of the spatial barrier, Hao Yan, had already sensed what had happened here the moment the cave abode was destroyed. Even though he was in another world, the spells he had left behind still existed. Hao Yan couldn't help but feel surprised. He didn't expect that someone could break through the power of magic on the star map lock. It seemed that this batch of cultivators who entered the mystic realm was not weak. Hao Yan's hand gestures quickly changed a few times, forming a complicated seal. An irregular crystal-like object suddenly appeared in front of him. The moment this object appeared, it slowly rotated. Following Hao Yan's command, this crystal-like object suddenly changed shape. At the same time, the spatial barrier around the cave abode where Kong Shin-mu and the others were located suddenly trembled. Then it changed rapidly. There was no order to the transformation of the spatial barrier. There was no law to its transformation at all. It was completely random. The cave abode that was originally destroyed actually reappeared in the space where the spatial barrier was located. Some cultivators discovered that there was no flow of aura in the newly formed cave abode. In other words, there was no flow of air. It was like a kind of magic tool. There was only the existence of space, no aura. For a moment, all the cultivators in the cave abode were on high alert. On the one hand, they were paying attention to the changes in the cave abode. On the other hand, they were quickly looking for the battle between Kong Shin-mu and He Zhonghai. The moment the spatial barrier changed, Kong Shin-mu sensed it. Not only did the spatial barrier repair itself, but the laws within it were also restored. Before comprehending the supreme power of space, Kong Shinmu only knew that there were laws in the spatial barrier, but he didn't know what the specific laws were. All the decisions he made were very cautious. Until the devouring power of the 7 devouring demon sealing art was activated. This devouring power didn't matter what kind of laws the other party had. As long as it was a law, it would devour it. It could be said that it was not picky at all. Now, the laws of the spatial barrier appeared again. This time, the laws made Kong Shinmu a little puzzled. He had to use the supreme power. Other than that, no other power could be used. Kong Shinmu was surprised. Was this the power of the supreme power of space? The laws related to space were quickly detected. Compared to Kong Shinmu, He Zhonghai wasn't as sensitive to the laws that appeared in the spatial barrier. He knew that there was a certain law, but he didn't know what kind of law it was. For this reason, He Zhonghai released the 2 powers, the formation vortex and the phantom vortex, at the same time, in an attempt to identify the laws within. Both were not supreme power. Without a doubt, He Zhonghai was attacked by the laws in the spatial barrier. The consequence of violating the laws was to be punished by the lightning tribulation of judgment. 2 lightning tribulation of judgment came crashing down and woke He Zhonghai up. He quickly put away the 2 secret techniques. As he wasn't sure what the laws were, He Zhonghai chose to wait and see. However, Kong Shinmu wouldn't wait for him to determine what the new laws were. While He Zhonghai couldn't act rashly, he quickly defeated He Zhonghai, took back the star map lock, and left with Mo Ya. Brat! He Zhonghai gritted his teeth, wishing he could tear Kong Shinmu to pieces. Only after Kong Shinmu and Mo Ya left did He Zhonghai understand what the new laws in the spatial barrier were. He Zhonghai retracted all of his power and circulated the supreme power of wind, speeding in the direction where Kong Shinmu and Mo Ya left. Chapter 57-36. Supreme wind power could allow one to fly in the air, which was comparable to any movement technique. Given He Zhonghai's current supreme wind power realm, he could completely replace the phantom vortex technique. For now, for He Zhonghai, it was equivalent to not being able to use the position vortex. This was what He Zhonghai was proud of, and he was certain that he could rely on it to defeat Kong Shinmu and obtain the 8-god astrolabe and the Star Atlas lock. Of course, there was also the Star Atlas lock that Kong Shinmu possessed. Most people didn't know what the Star Atlas lock was, but he clearly knew that it was a seal of space. Kong Shinmu didn't deserve the power of the seal. He Zhonghai did not know that Jiang Shunwu had already grasped the power of the seal. Moreover, he had used the power of the seal that he had grasped, as well as the power that the seal itself exerted on Jiang Shunwu, to break through the power of the seal that existed on the Star Atlas lock. In other words, the seal had already recognized Kong Shinmu. In addition, Kong Shinmu had already comprehended the power of space, and the Star Atlas lock happened to be a seal of space, so the seal had completely become Kong Shinmu's power. Once the seal was completely comprehended by Kong Shinmu, it would form the laws of space. At that time, everything within the space that Kong Shinmu planned would be bound by the laws of space that Kong Shinmu had created. Before Kong Shinmu stepped into the Gate of Rules, the seal only existed in the form of the laws of space. This law was that no techniques related to space could be used. Kong Shinmu himself wouldn't be affected at all. This power, combined with the supreme power of space, could release an even stronger power. Kong Shinmu knew that he couldn't delay any longer, so he decisively released the power of space. At the same time, he released the power of the seal. At his current level, he could already skillfully combine the two without suffering any backlash from the power. The realm of the supreme spatial force was not high. It could only serve as a restriction. What was truly needed to be used in battle was the supreme divine flame. If the power of a 9th stage supreme divine flame were to face He Zhonghai's 9th stage supreme wind force or supreme lightning force, it might not necessarily be a match. He Zhonghai was also aware of this point. He knew that Kong Shinmu possessed multiple types of unparalleled god powers. It was just that he did not cultivate them to perfection. For example, the unparalleled soul power was only at the 4th level. Even though the unparalleled soul power was special and could directly corrode a cultivator's soul consciousness, the unparalleled soul force was still unique. However, the supreme soul power of the 4th stage couldn't cause any big waves. The only 9th level supreme power was the power of the supreme divine fire. Since the beginning of the fight, He Zhonghai had more or less figured out the strangeness of Kong Shinmu's supreme divine fire power. It was different from the power of ordinary supreme divine flames. There was an elemental aura mixed within it, and it was very similar to the flames of dead spirits. However, the addition of a portion of the flames of dead spirits was not enough to pose any threat. He Zhonghai had already released the peerless power of wind and lightning. These two types of unparalleled god powers had both reached the 9th level. Although he could not use other secret techniques, he could use these two types of unparalleled god powers to create laws. Using these laws to deal with Kong Shinmu was an extremely easy task. Most importantly, he had the power of regeneration. Although the power of regeneration was not an orthodox supreme power, after He Zhonghai's cultivation, it was close to being a supreme power. He Zhonghai released the power of regeneration and did not suffer any backlash from the laws. It was obvious that the laws had already regarded the power of regeneration as a supreme power. The moment He Zhonghai released the power of regeneration, Kong Shinmu had already gathered the supreme divine flame. At the same time, he sensed the existence of the power of regeneration. Moreover, with his supreme spatial force, he could see the minute particles that existed around He Zhonghai. These particles were like the power of nature that existed in the natural world, and they floated around He Zhonghai's body. When He Zhonghai released the power of wind and supreme lightning, the particles floating around him would automatically move closer to his body. The power that was consumed would be restored in an extremely short period of time. The power of regeneration? A year ago, when He Zhonghai fought with the divine light, he used the power of regeneration to forcefully beat the divine light back to the other world. A year later, He Zhonghai once again used the power of regeneration. When Kong Shinmu realized the existence of this power, he suddenly had an idea. On the surface, there was a huge disparity between Kong Shinmu and He Zhonghai's battle strength. Kong Shinmu had no chance of winning. However, this was only on the surface. Supreme Divine Flame was the advanced form of the flames of dead spirits. The 9th level Supreme Divine Flame was the advanced form of the flames of dead spirits. It was enough to suppress the Supreme Wind and Supreme Lightning at the same level. Kong Shinmu used the power of space and released the power of the Supreme Divine Flame without holding back. The moment the Supreme Divine Flame swallowed He Zhonghai's body, He Zhonghai still felt that his two supreme powers could withstand the Supreme Divine Flame. Even if they couldn't withstand it, the power of regeneration could help him recover quickly. However, the reality was cruel. When the unparalleled God Spirit Flame struck He Zhonghai, the unparalleled wind force and unparalleled lightning force were instantly destroyed. The power of devouring, which had been refined by the 7 devouring demon sealing art, swept out in an instant, swallowing the supreme wind and supreme lightning. After devouring these two supreme powers, the connection between Kong Shinmu and the power of magic became even closer. This also confirmed his guess. He needed all of his supreme powers to reach the 9th level before he could step into the door of rules. Moreover, all of his supreme powers referred to not only the supreme powers he already possessed, but also the new supreme powers he obtained. He Zhonghai, who had lost his supreme powers, was on the verge of death when the power of regeneration came into effect. Kong Shinmu had been waiting for the power of regeneration. When the power of regeneration was activated, the power of devouring instantly swept over, wrapping him up and quickly swallowing him. He Zhonghai, who had lost his power of regeneration, could not resist any force at all and collapsed in this broken space. The battle between Kong Shinmu and He Zhonghai ended. The restrictions on the space were also lifted. Senior Moya, let's leave this place quickly. Kong Shinmu did not intend to stay here any longer. Not long ago, he had sensed Dan Yuanfei's aura. Up until now, he had not fought with Dan Yuanfei, so he was not sure how strong Dan Yuanfei was. However, he knew that this was not a place to stay for long. Kong Shinmu used the power of space to quickly leave the cave with Moya. The moment the two of them left the cave, the layers of space around the cave suddenly disappeared. The cave was exposed to the ordinary space. Chapter 57-37. There was only one possibility for this to happen. The battle between Kong Shinmu and He Zhonghai had ended, and they had broken the rules of the space rampart. As a result, All the cultivators who had entered the cave mansion were thrown out by the space rampart. In other words, the battle between Kong Shinmu and He Zhonghai had ended. At this moment, there was only Kong Shinmu and no He Zhonghai. The answer was obvious. All the cultivators' eyes fell on Kong Shinmu and Mo Ya. Senior Mo Ya, let's go. Kong Shinmu did not intend to pay attention to these cultivators. Now that he had gotten what he wanted, it was time to find Ao Tong's puppet. It seemed that he could not keep calling it Ao Tong's puppet. He should give it a name. Let's call it Blood Puppet. While he was talking to Mo Ya, Kong Shinmu had already renamed Ao Tong's puppet. Mo Ya nodded. The two of them turned around and left the place. The battle between Kong Shinmu and He Zhonghai ended with Kong Shinmu's victory. What did this mean? It meant that Kong Shinmu not only obtained the star map lock, but he also obtained the star map lock core. None of the cultivators present would let Kong Shinmu leave just like that. The Everlasting Pavilion's disciples were the first to bear the brunt. The moment Kong Shinmu and Mo Ya set off, they stepped forward and blocked their way. At the same time, Dan Yuanfei also descended. The two of them were surrounded by the Everlasting Pavilion's disciples. Kong Shinmu, right? Dan Yuanfei's eyes coldly swept across the two of them. Finally, his eyes fell on Kong Shinmu. Regarding Kong Shinmu, Dan Yuanfei did have an impression of him. Previously, in the ancient desolate ancient city, he had seen Kong Shinmu and Mo Ya enter the city together. Later, they left the ancient desolate ancient city unscathed. Just think about it, there was a big event in the ancient desolate city that startled the entire sealed secret realm. Especially when General Leng Chonghong's will was to eradicate the 7 devouring devil sealing arts fragment. At that time, the ancient desolate city was flooded with rivers of blood. Even if the derivation formation was broken and General Leng Chonghong disappeared, the ancient desolate city had not been restored to its original state, and there were traces of puppet insects everywhere in the space, as well as the various blood puppets left behind by General Leng Chonghong during the ancient martial kingdom era. Because of Hai Fan's disappearance, Gu Feng went to find Kong Shinmu to reason with him. At that time, Dan Yuanfei had thought that Gu Feng had misunderstood the situation. Now, it seemed that he had overlooked the details. Kong Shinmu had long since killed Hai Fan and seized Hai Fan's summoning artifact, Star Devourer. He erased Hai Fan's contract imprint on Star Devourer and took it for himself. He even killed Gu Feng, who was sent to capture him. What Dan Yuanfei regretted was that he hadn't dealt with Kong Shinmu earlier. That way, Feng Er wouldn't have met with misfortune. Eldest senior brother, it's him. The disciples of the Everlasting Pavilion stared at Kong Shinmu. They wanted to tear Kong Shinmu apart with their eyes. Yes, it's me. What can I do for you? Kong Shinmu's reaction was very calm. Life and death were fated. Moreover, on the path of cultivation, the strong survived while the weak could only be eliminated. This was the inevitable rule of survival, and no one could change it. It was because he was weak that he was bullied by Hai Fan. Later, he killed Hai Fan through some means and obtained the 8-god star plate. This was a matter of course. In the world of cultivation, the most common and normal thing was to kill people and steal their treasures. And then there was Gu Feng. If Kong Shinmu didn't become stronger, he would be bullied. This was the cruel law of cultivation. Of course, it didn't mean that the people of the Everlasting Pavilion were wrong. They also had their own standpoint. No matter who killed the people of the Everlasting Pavilion, they were the enemies of the Everlasting Pavilion. In this matter, there was no right or wrong. There were only different standpoints. You'll pay with your life, Dan Yuanfei said coldly. Kong Shinmu's calmness was beyond his expectation. A mere wandering cultivator dared to be so arrogant. Was it because of the woman beside him that he was relying on? With just the two of them, did they think they could compete with the entire Everlasting Pavilion? So, it's impossible for you to give way? Kong Shinmu glanced at the many disciples of the Everlasting Pavilion who surrounded them and said indifferently, "It's not impossible. If you die, not to mention this path, I can even give you the entire secret territory." Dan Yuanfei raised his eyebrows. With a wave of his hand, a giant sword appeared in his hand. The huge sword was completely black. Just by standing in the air, it emitted a powerful sword aura that caused the air to tremble. The sword energy emitted from the giant sword was very powerful. At the same time, it gave Kong Shinmu a familiar feeling. He felt that the material of the giant sword was black iron. Although it had been forged, it was still black iron. Since it was black iron, it should be helpful for him to improve his supreme black iron power. Kong Shinmu actually had the ability to take Mo Ya away. However, he also knew that even if he could escape unscathed this time, the people of the Everlasting Pavilion would come after him in the future. Moreover, the enmity between him and the Everlasting Pavilion had already been formed. Escaping wouldn't solve any problems. The only way to solve the problem was to face it head-on. Kong Shinmu immediately released the Supreme Divine Flame. Kong Shinmu. Emoya was a little worried. I'm fine, Senior. You should always pay attention to the surroundings. Kong Shinmu said in a deep voice. Emoya nodded and flew to the side. Although there were disciples of the Everlasting Pavilion blocking her way, Kong Shinmu had already cleared the way for Emoya. After ensuring that Emoya wouldn't be hurt, Kong Shinmu completely released the Supreme Divine Flame. In an instant, the 9th level Supreme Divine Flame spread and surrounded all the disciples of the Everlasting Pavilion. The power of a 9th stage Supreme Divine Fire? Dan Yuanfei quickly recognized the Supreme Divine Flame released by Kong Shinmu. He had seen quite a number of people who cultivated the power of Supreme Divine Fire, but those who could cultivate the power of Supreme Divine Fire to the 9th level were few and far between. However, it was a bit ignorant to think that he could deal with the Everlasting Pavilion with the power of the 9th level Supreme Divine Flame. When Kong Shinmu released the Supreme Divine Flame, it swept towards Dan Yuanfei. Dan Yuanfei waved the giant sword in his hand, trying to split Kong Shinmu's Supreme Divine Flame with sword chi. It wasn't until the two collided that he realized that something was wrong. This was not the power of the Supreme Divine Flame in a simple sense, but the Supreme Divine Flame evolved from the Supreme Divine Flame. There seemed to be the aura of another world coming from it. Was that the flame of the undead? By the time he realized the flame of the undead, the Supreme Divine Flame had already penetrated the giant black sword and invaded Dan Yuanfei's body. After all, Dan Yuanfei was not an ordinary person. He quickly controlled his power to resist the Supreme Divine Flame. Dan Yuanfei believed that there was no reason for him to lose to Jiang Shenwu, a 9th stage Supreme Divine Strength cultivator. However, the reality was cruel. The supreme godly power of Yi-Fei's 9th level realm could not resist the 9th level Supreme God Spiritual Flame and was even suppressed by the Supreme God Spiritual Flame. The Supreme God Spirit Flame invaded Dan Yuanfei's soul, consciousness, and sea of consciousness, shattering his soul, consciousness, and sea of consciousness. Then, it quickly spread throughout his meridians, completely destroying his supreme god power. In the end, it refined the black iron giant sword. Chapter 5738. Kong Shinmu had killed the Everlasting Pavilion's eldest senior disciple, Dan Yuanfei, in one hit. It was the first major event in the secret realm. The news spread like wildfire. Everyone was discussing who Kong Shinmu was. In the secret realm, rumors about Kong Shinmu's background started to spread. After killing Dan Yuanfei, Kong Shinmu also defeated the Everlasting Pavilion's disciples who wanted to avenge Dan Yuanfei. Then, he quickly left the place with Mo Ya. This was the secret realm of the secret realms. They came here for the Star Atlas Lock. Now, not only did they get the Star Atlas Lock, but they also got the Star Atlas Lock core and the power of the Star Atlas Lock. For Jiang Shenwu, this was a kind of fortuitous opportunity. Senior, you came with me for nothing. This was what Kong Shinmu felt guilty about. Fortunately, Senior Emoya was not hurt. Otherwise, he would have been a sinner. How could that be? Hearing this, Emoya smiled slightly. Then, she opened her right hand. Suddenly, a cloud of 7-colored mist floated up from her palm. Not long after, the 7-colored mist formed a lotus. This is... Kong Shinmu looked at the 7-colored lotus in Emoya's right hand in confusion. This is the Moon Heart Lotus. Emoya said gently. I found it not long ago. It was Kong Shinmu's first time hearing about the Moon Heart Lotus. Naturally, he did not know what it was or what its effects were. He only sensed that the air around the Moon Heart Lotus froze the moment it appeared. Moreover, there seemed to be a strange aura coming from its body that spread to the surroundings. Emoya had some misgivings and quickly put away the Moon Heart-colored lotus. Kong Shinmu, let's leave this secret realm quickly. Then, Moya urged him. Kong Shinmu nodded. The two sped up. Although they heard about Kong Shinmu's achievements along the way, they were not shaken. They arrived at the exit of the secret realm. The so-called exit of the mystic realm was actually the entrance to the mystic realm. However, when exiting the mystic realm, the structure of the mystic realm's passageway was very different from the structure of the entrance. Moreover, although there was no supreme space force of nature in the passageway, there was another supreme divine force of nature. It was a white gas. Just by looking at his appearance, Kong Shinmu instinctively thought of a supreme divine power. Moya's eyes curved. She smiled gently and looked at Kong Shinmu tenderly. Kong Shinmu was well aware of this. This white gas was not the power of nature of other supreme divine powers, it was the power of nature of the supreme holy ice power. Since that was the case, Kong Shinmu released his devouring power without any hesitation. The devouring power instantly spread along the passageway, devouring all the supreme holy ice power and nature power in the passageway. After withdrawing his devouring power, Kong Shinmu and Moya entered the tunnel. Just as the two of them entered the passageway, the cultivators from the various sects in the outer region rushed over and entered the passageway. Apart from the everlasting pavilion, the other three sects, including some rogue cultivators, also had experts at the 9th level of supreme divine power. For them, a mere passageway was no longer enough to stop them. Although Kong Shinmu could not immediately comprehend the supreme holy ice power, he also had the 9th level supreme divine flame. The current Kong Shinmu's strength was far stronger than a year ago. He quickly left the passageway with Moya. At the exit of the passageway, Kong Shinmu turned around and glanced at the exit. When he entered, he did not notice that the exit was already there. He had only entered the entrance because he was lucky. Of course, he could not conclude that he was just lucky just based on what he saw now. Perhaps it was because his strength was much stronger than a year ago, coupled with the fact that he came out from the exit. He could see the secret of the passageway. No matter what, this experience was very dangerous, but it was also very rewarding. Senior, wait a moment. Kong Shinmu looked at the exit, then at the entrance. With a little trick, he used the mystery of the entrance to merge the entrance and the exit into one. In this way, the entrance and exit of the mystic realm were one. Kong Shinmu had already figured out the mystery behind it. Through his calculations, he had a rough understanding of the situation. After the changes were made, he could no longer enter the mystic realm from the entrance, nor could he leave the mystic realm from the exit. No matter which road he took, they would only fall into a cycle. Kong Shinmu, the mysteries hidden at the entrance of the secret realm should change, right? Moya glanced at Kong Shinmu's actions with her beautiful eyes and saw through the mysteries hidden within. Yes, it will change within a certain period of time. There was some regret in Kong Shinmu's voice. I can only change it this time. When the time is up, the hidden formation will automatically change, and my spell will automatically disappear. This is enough. Let's go. Moya smiled softly. To be able to do this, it really proved that Kong Shinmu's power had increased to a terrifying level. It was not an exaggeration to say that even He Zhonghai might not be able to do this. At the entrance of the mystic realm, a large number of cultivators had already entered the passage, but there were a few who had not entered. Although they did not see Kong Shinmu casting the spell, or did not know what happened at the exit of the passage, they only noticed that the passage had changed rapidly at this moment. The most obvious thing was that the supreme divine force of nature in the passage had disappeared. When entering this passage, they encountered the supreme divine force of nature. Although it was just some ordinary supreme divine force, it still existed. At this moment, there was actually no supreme divine force of nature in the passage. At first glance, there was no difference between the exit and the entrance. There must be something strange about it. The exit of the mystic realm was the ancient barren ancient city. In 1 year, the ancient barren ancient city was the same as before. The two did not stay for long and first set off for the nearest city. The city closest to the ancient barren ancient city was much more normal than the messy ancient barren ancient city. It could even be described as luxurious. Kong Shinmu also did not expect to see such a city here. Kong Shinmu, do you feel that there is something strange about the city in front of you? Moya's beautiful eyes narrowed as she asked doubtfully. It is a little strange. After all, this is a mystic realm. Such a city should not exist. Previously, After the battle between Kong Xinmu and Lang Zhonghong, he was sent to another city by the realm. On the way back to the ancient barren ancient city, they passed by two cities. The scenery of each city was roughly the same as the ancient barren ancient city before the battle. I have a feeling that this city is not a city in the mystic realm. Mo Ya's footsteps slowed down. Kong Xinmu also stopped. After carefully sensing it, he was shocked. Chapter 5739. Kong Xinmu gathered his energy again and approached the city. Although his power had passed through, he could sense a special barrier around the city. It was like a barrier of space. Kong Xinmu became cautious when he mentioned the space barrier. This time, he quietly released the Supreme Space Force. After examining it with the Supreme Space Force, he confirmed that the special barrier was essentially a space barrier. However, unlike the space barrier they encountered in the cave abode, this space barrier contained another kind of scorching aura apart from the undead flame. This scorching aura came from a type of scarlet element. Senior Mo Ya, do you know of anything that's similar to the undead flame? It appears to be a scarlet element. Kong Xinmu roughly described what he sensed to Mo Ya. Scarlet element. Mo Ya rubbed her chin and pondered. Senior, I'm guessing that this thing is also from the other world, and it's highly likely to be from the 4 great corpse progenitor clans. Kong Xinmu said in a deep voice. After all, he had already come into contact with the undead flame, so he could sense these things. Even though he didn't know what these crimson elements were, he was sure that there was a connection between them. Kong Xinmu, I just thought of something. The 4 great corpse progenitor clans were not unfamiliar to Mo Ya. The undead flame belonged to the undead spirit clan. In that case, the other 3 clans also had their clan treasures. The fire spirit clan's heavenly serene flame was one of them. Of course, the fire spirit clan was a big clan, and the heavenly serene flame was just one of them. However, the heavenly serene flame matched the scarlet element that Kong Xinmu had described. The fire spirit clan's heavenly serene flame. Mo Ya thought for a moment and said softly. The fire spirit clan's heavenly serene flame. It was Kong Xinmu's first time hearing about the fire spirit clan. He did not know which clans the 4 great corpse progenitor clans were, but he knew that it included the undead spirit clan. However, Kong Xinmu was no stranger to heavenly serene flame. The first supreme divine power he cultivated was the supreme divine flame. When the supreme divine flame reached a certain level, it could devour the flame energy in the world. Among these flames was the heavenly serene flame. Of course, including the heavenly serene flame was one thing. He had not really swallowed the heavenly serene flame. Since the city in front of him contained the elements of the heavenly dark fire, it was not a big problem for him to devour it. Moreover, Kong Xinmu and Mo Ya had left the ancient desolate ancient city to search for a city that was closer to the ancient desolate ancient city. After all, the 2 of them had entered the sealed secret realm purely by chance. They had not entered the sealed secret realm intentionally. Until now, they still didn't know what kind of existence the sealed arcane realm was. Since this city was so strange, the 2 of them took a detour around it and planned to go to another city. He could go anywhere to get information. However, what puzzled them was that this city seemed to be moving. No matter where they went, they could always see this city. At this point, if the 2 of them still didn't understand what was going on, it would be unreasonable. It was obvious that someone in this city was paying attention to their movements at all times and was always following them. Senior, wait a minute. Kong Xinmu stopped. Mo Ya also stopped with Kong Xinmu. In this city, someone was deliberately looking for trouble. Their stance was also very obvious. If they did not solve this problem, they would always be entangled by this trouble. Since there was also a space barrier around the city, and the space barrier contained the elements of the undead flame. Therefore, there must be a cultivator who moved his cave abode out in this city. Moreover, even if he was not in the city, the people in the city were also his fellow sect members. At this time, in another parallel world, Hao Yan. After the battle between Kong Xinmu and He Zhonghai ended, he planned to change to a new rule. However, he did not expect Kong Xinmu to actually leave. Moreover, it was certain that Kong Xinmu must have mastered the supreme spatial power. Only the supreme spatial power could move freely in the space barrier. When entering the arcane realm, Hao Yan also discovered the supreme spatial power of nature condensed in the passage. It was not that he was not tempted. Unfortunately, he could not condense the supreme spatial power of nature and could only give it up in the end. However, he did not expect that the supreme spatial power of nature had already been condensed by someone and had even comprehended it. Not only did he comprehend it, but he also seemed to have mastered it to a very high degree. He did not expect such a powerhouse to exist in such a small arcane realm. Hao Yan released a signal. This was a Dharma artifact that he had personally refined. It was a communication Dharma artifact. The other half was in the hands of the left protector. At this time, the left protector was in the city in front of Kong Shin-mu. It was also his intention to stop Kong Shin-mu. Hao Yan sensed that Kong Shin-mu had already left the cave abode, but he knew that he should not have left the sealed arcane realm. Therefore, he wanted the left protector to stop Kong Shin-mu. He was interested in the supreme spatial power that Kong Shin-mu had condensed. He also conveyed his intention to the left protector. If Kong Shin-mu was willing to join them, then he would let Kong Shin-mu take the position of the alliance leader. If Kong Shin-mu was not willing to agree, then there was no need for him to stay. There was no genius in the alliance that could not be found. To put it simply, geniuses who did not follow the arrangements of the alliance would only have a dead end. Of course, the left protector had only received the message from Hao Yan. He did not know what Kong Shin-mu looked like. They had not been in the arcane realm for long. Although they had heard about the various deeds of Kong Shin-mu in the ancient desolate ancient city, they still did not know what Kong Shin-mu looked like. There were many cultivators who claimed to have seen Kong Shin-mu before, and they had a variety of descriptions of Kong Shin-mu. In summary, Kong Shin-mu looked fierce and had a domineering aura. Therefore, when the left protector saw Kong Shin-mu and Mo Ye, he was not sure if the young man was Kong Shin-mu. Moreover, they did not have to follow Kong Shin-mu and Mo Ye, but Tang Xiaoyu. Over the past year, Tang Xiaoyu had almost explored all the sealed arcane realms. He was a little worried about Kong Shin-mu and Mo Ye, so he had been asking around for news about Kong Shin-mu and Mo Ye. The results were comparable to the information that the left protector had obtained. Finally, he came to check personally. Tang Xiaoyu was a wanted criminal of the Heavenly Yuan Palace. The moment he appeared, he attracted the left protector's attention. The left protector controlled the city and followed Tang Xiaoyu. The current situation was that Kong Shin-mu and Mo Ye were standing in front of the city, and Tang Xiaoyu was standing behind them. The left protector was about to question Tang Xiaoyu, but he noticed Kong Shin-mu and Mo Ye. Tang Xiaoyu could notice the existence of the city because he was from the Heavenly Yuan Palace in the outer realm. Chapter 5740. The left protector sized up Kong Shin-mu and Mo Ye, his expression suddenly becoming solemn. These two people's supreme divine power realm was unimaginably high. The young man dressed in ordinary clothes had the transcendent strength of a ninth-stage cultivator. As for the woman beside him, the aura around her was rather unique, preventing him from examining her with his power. He was unable to determine her cultivation base. Hey! The left protector was about to go out to check on Kong Shin-mu and Mo Ye when he heard a shout. It was Tang Xiaoyu. Tang Xiaoyu was in a bad mood. A city wouldn't be able to stop him. However, the owner of the city was clearly targeting him. Delaying his search was the fault of this city's owner. The left protector heard Tang Xiaoyu's voice and opened the city gates for him. "Young Master Tang, please come in." The left protector's voice came from the city. Tang Xiaoyu recognized his identity as soon as he heard the voice, and his face immediately darkened. This was the left protector's voice. The United Alliance had always been at odds with the outer realms, and he didn't know why they had appeared here again. Tang Xiaoyu didn't want to get involved with the United Alliance, so he turned and left. The left protector saw Tang Xiaoyu leaving and immediately stopped him. On the other side, Kong Shin-mu also heard the left protector say, "Young Master Tang." "It's Tang Xiaoyu, right?" Kong Shin-mu thought of Tang Xiaoyu. Thinking about it, it had been a year since he parted with Tang Xiaoyu. He didn't know what he had gained in this year. "It should be," Mo Ye replied softly. The city had stopped, which meant that the owner of the city was chasing after Tang Xiaoyu. For Kong Shin-mu and Mo Ye, Tang Xiaoyu had taken care of them along the way, and was someone they could trust. The two naturally wouldn't just watch Tang Xiaoyu be captured, so they approached the city. This action attracted the attention of the city's owner, the Left Protector. He hadn't even asked, but these two actually took the initiative to come to him. How interesting. Although the Left Protector didn't act personally, he sent people. All the members of the United Alliance wore the same uniform, red and white, with an identity card on their waists. The 20 people who came out this time all had blue identity cards, which represented that they were from the Outer Realm. As soon as the 20 of them left the city, they headed straight for Kong Shinmu and Mo Ya. Tang Xiaoyu had already left, but when he sensed the disciples of the United Union at the main gate of the city, he realized that something might have happened here. Even though he'd left the secret realm a long time ago, he'd always been paying attention to Kong Shinmu and Mo Ya's movements, so he was naturally aware that the two of them hadn't left the secret realm in the past year. Any news that came from the desolate ancient city had to be confirmed. This time was no exception. Tang Xiaoyu saw Kong Shinmu and Mo Ya the moment he approached the city gate. Without any hesitation, he directly flew over. Senior Mo, Brother Jiang. Tang Xiaoyu smiled. It really is you. Kong Shinmu glanced at Tang Xiaoyu. From the looks of it, Tang Xiaoyu's cultivation had improved a lot in the past year. Moreover, Tang Xiaoyu's 10,000 elephants origin superposition technique had become more exquisite. When Tang Xiaoyu appeared, Kong Shinmu only noticed the abnormality in the space. Brother Jiang, let's leave this place first. The reason why Tang Xiaoyu returned was to check on Kong Shinmu and Mo Ya. Now that they'd met up, there was no need to stay here any longer. Just like Tang Xiaoyu, Kong Shinmu's original intention was also Tang Xiaoyu. Now, there was no need to continue staying here. The three of them decisively turned around and flew to the side. Tang Xiaoyu was just a wanted criminal of the Heaven Yuan Palace. The other two weren't even famous people. Unexpectedly, they were ignored by these three people. The 20 members of the United Union, who had already left the city gate, uniformly rushed forward, blocking in front of Kong Shinmu and the other two. Of course, these 20 members of the United Union weren't enough to stop Kong Shinmu and the other two. What stopped the three of them was the space rampart. What astonished Kong Shinmu was that these 20 members of the United Union could all release space ramparts. The essence of these space ramparts that surrounded them was the flames of the dead spirits. This made Kong Shinmu involuntarily think that the dead spirits clan of the four great corpse ancestor clans of the other realm were together with the people who appeared in front of them. Or, there were people of the dead spirits clan of the other realm in this city. Brother Jiang, this is the United Union, an organization formed by the Outer Realm and several special regions around it. Tang Xiaoyu thought for a moment and added. Among its members are the Demon God clan and the Emperor Bat clan. Kong Shinmu's expression froze when he heard this. The Demon God clan and the Emperor Bat clan. He had a grudge with these two clans. Along the way, in order to pursue him, these two clans did not hesitate to send some experts. Jiang Shenwu, on the other hand, killed all of those experts. He had thought that he would never meet people from these two clans again. He never thought that he would run into the United Union again. The United Union has more members. The Demon God clan and the Emperor Bat clan are only members, and they are not the main force. Speaking of this, Tang Xiaoyu seemed to have remembered something. By the way, Brother Jiang, these two clans are both from the Nightmarish Domain. The Nightmarish Domain was similar to the Outer Realm. The difference was that the Outer World Realm was just a special spatial region. The Nightmarish Domain was equivalent to a parallel world. The Nightmarish Domain had a gate that connected to the other realm. This was something the Outer Realm couldn't compare to. Moreover, the Nightmarish Domain was vast, and there were many experts in it. If there were cultivators in the Outer Realm who had discovered the Realm of Rule and had the experience of opening the Gate of Rule, then there were experts of laws in the Nightmarish Domain who could set foot in the Gate of Rule. The United Union's base was in the center of the Nightmarish Domain. Tang Xiaoyu had a chance to go to the Nightmarish Domain before. He had lived there for 2 years. Although those 2 years were his darkest, he had never found the United Union's base. Yes. Kong Shinmu nodded. It seemed that he had underestimated the origins of the Demon God clan and the Emperor Bat clan. They were from the Nightmarish Domain. There are a lot of members in the United Union. I don't know exactly who they are, but I'm sure that they have something to do with the Dead Spirit clan in the other realm. As for the other 3 clans, the Corpse Ancestor clan, I don't know either. Tang Xiaoyu had his reasons for saying this. Although he hadn't met many people from the United Union, every time he saw them, he had seen them use spatial ramparts. This was enough to prove that they were related to the Dead Spirit clan. I think so too. Kong Xinmu had some speculations when he saw the 20 members of the United Union use spatial ramparts. Let's go out first. Tang Xiaoyu was about to use the manifestation essence folding technique when he sensed that there was something wrong with the surrounding space. The manifestation essence folding technique could distinguish the range of the spatial ramparts and the barriers that existed within them. They could pass through the barriers and escape smoothly. Chapter 57-41. Tang Xiaoyu was sure that the passage that suddenly appeared was due to Kong Xinmu's supreme divine power. Other than the 10,000 elephants origin stacking technique, which could easily break through the space barrier, there was also supreme spatial power. Supreme spatial power was a kind of supreme divine power of a single element. The passageway leading into the secret realm of the cave mansion was filled with the supreme power of nature. Tang Xiaoyu wasn't the least bit surprised that Jiang Shenwu had mastered the supreme space force of nature. Instead, he felt that it was an extremely normal thing. It could be said that he had some dealings with Kong Xinmu. It was not an exaggeration to say that Tang Xiaoyu had watched Kong Xinmu's supreme divine power grow step by step. Kong Xinmu used supreme spatial power to open a passage to break through the surrounding space barrier. Kong Xinmu and the other two rushed in and quickly broke through the barrier. The 20 members of the Union Alliance obviously did not want to let them go so easily. Seeing that the spatial barrier was unable to trap the three of them, all of them dashed forward and unleashed their supreme divine powers. Some of them even unleashed the flames of undead spirits in an attempt to stop Jiang Shenwu and the other two. Senior Mo, Brother Jiang, you two leave first. Tang Xiaoyu looked at the situation behind him and knew that these people did not want to let them go. Kong Xinmu hesitated for a moment. Brother Jiang, I personally don't have any conflicts with the United Alliance, but the Sky Yuan Palace seems to have had some conflicts with the United Alliance. Not only the Sky Yuan Palace, but the Sky Cloud sect also has some conflicts with the United Alliance. Tang Xiaoyu did not care about these sects, nor did he care about power or status. He also did not care about cultivation. He only wanted to live freely in the world. He especially disliked the Union Alliance. It was probably because of the conflict between the Sky Yuan Palace and the Union Alliance that the Union Alliance disliked the disciples of the Sky Yuan Palace. In short, the Sky Yuan Palace and the Cloud sect are not members of the Union Alliance. After pausing for a moment, Tang Xiaoyu added, "It seems that the Everlasting Pavilion has also withdrawn from the United Alliance in recent years. As for what happened between the two, to be honest, I'm quite curious, but I couldn't find out anything." Kong Xinmu listened attentively to Tang Xiaoyu's words. Suddenly, the Everlasting Pavilion was mentioned again. Coupled with Tang Xiaoyu's curious face, Jiang Shenwu could not help but feel helpless. After cultivating for so many years, this was the first time he had seen such a carefree cultivator like Tang Xiaoyu. Hurry up and leave. Tang Xiaoyu thought that the left protector did not like him and wanted to cause trouble for him, so he simply stayed. Although he was wanted by the Heavenly Yuan Palace, eldest senior brother would definitely not ignore him if he was in danger. Tang Xiaoyu was not afraid of the left protector because his eldest senior brother Lien Yi could appear at any time. I feel that something is amiss. Kong Xinmu was deep in thought. According to Tang Xiaoyu, there was a conflict between the United Union and the Heavenly Yuan Palace. Therefore, the people of the United Union would definitely target the disciples of the Heavenly Yuan Palace. However, looking at the current situation, the so-called left protector obviously wanted to keep the three of them here. The reason why Kong Xinmu thought so was because of the space barrier around the city. The casting method of these space barriers was somewhat similar to the casting method of the person in the cave mansion. The person in the cave mansion did not show up in the end. Perhaps, that person was the left protector. Brother Jiang, listen to me. You take the senior away first. I can get away by myself. Tang Xiaoyu made friends with Kong Xinmu out of selfishness because he wanted to see his idol. But after a long time, he understood Kong Xinmu's character. As a friend, he must not watch the United Union bully others. Brother Tang, in the secret realm of the ancient desolate ancient city, the location of the star map lock was a cave mansion. I already came into contact with a space barrier there. But that person's casting method is similar to the one in this city. Kong Shin-mu thought for a moment and said, "A space barrier similar to the one in this city?" Tang Xiaoyu's heart skipped a beat. Hao Yan. Tang Xiaoyu immediately thought of that person. Huh. It was the first time for Kong Shin-mu to hear the name Hao Yan. Hao Yan. Let me put it this way. He's a cultivation maniac and obsessed with refining artifacts. He's a famous artificer in the Duan domain. Tang Xiaoyu was confused. I remember that he doesn't like to join in on the fun. In the end, Tang Xiaoyu had to think that Hao Yan had been in this secret realm all along, and that it had moved and brought him here. That was the only reason that could explain it at the moment. If it's really Hao Yan who moved the cave mansion out, we don't need to worry too much. He must still be in that secret realm. Maybe he's already in a parallel world, like the other world. Tang Xiaoyu's words didn't ease the heavy atmosphere at all. After all, the city in front of them was the left protector of the United Union. Kong Shin-mu and the other two had already escaped from the space barrier. 20 cultivators from other realms in the United Union's uniform were chasing after them. None of you can leave. As soon as the left protector's voice fell, the space around them changed dramatically. Then their vision darkened. The darkness lasted for less than a breath's time, but a second later, they found themselves in the city. A middle-aged man in a purple robe showed up from one side and walked to Kong Shin-mu. Left protector, are you crazy? Tang Xiaoyu frowned, his voice full of dissatisfaction. Old friend, long time no see. Is this how you greet me? The left protector smiled and glanced at Kong Shin-mu. And this is... By now, Kong Shin-mu and the other two were already in the city, but the left protector still couldn't sense Kong Shin-mu's real strength. This is an old friend of mine. I went back to my hometown a while ago, so we came out together. Tang Xiaoyu said with a hearty smile. Kong Shin-mu noticed that the left protector's expression froze when he heard Tang Xiaoyu's words. He seemed to be afraid of Tang Xiaoyu's hometown. Since he's your old friend, he's an honored guest. Please come in. Tang Xiaoyu was already used to the left protector's sudden change in attitude. Moreover, this was only the left protector's superficial work. He was ruthless and unreasonable. Most importantly, he had always been frivolous. Even the name of the old man from his hometown might not be able to control the left protector. No need to be so polite. We still have things to do, Tang Xiaoyu said lightly. Then, he signaled for Kong Shin-mu and Mo Ya to leave first. Tang Xiaoyu, since your old friend has come to the outer realm, why don't you introduce him to the outer realm? Why are you in such a hurry to leave? As the left protector's voice fell, the space barrier that was originally hidden around the city suddenly rose. Chapter 5742. Left Protector. Is this your so-called hospitality? Tang Xiaoyu glanced at the closed city gate and the space rampart that suddenly lit up and said indifferently, "Of course, if I don't do this, I can't take you to the Union Alliance as guests." The left protector smiled gently and said, "We're very busy. We don't have time to go with you to the Union Alliance as guests," Tang Xiaoyu said in a deep voice. "Tang Xiaoyu, you know that this is my own city, which is equivalent to my celestial artifact. Once the city gate is closed and the enchantment appears, it means that the celestial artifact has been activated. I can't stop it." The left protector shrugged his shoulders innocently and smiled faintly. "By the way, I haven't asked for this brother's name yet." "I can't tell you my name. I'm just an ordinary person," Tang Xiaoyu said casually. He was now clear that this person was here for Kong Shin-mu. However, looking at the left protector situation, he didn't know Kong Shin-mu. Kong Shin-mu knew what Tang Xiaoyu was worried about, so he nodded gently. At this moment, the moving city came to a sudden stop. The city gate was opened again. Left protector, what does this mean? Tang Xiaoyu glanced at the open city gate and raised his eyebrows. "This is the report of our Union Alliance's spy." The left protector stood up and took a step forward, landing in front of the three people. "Moreover, the members of our Union Alliance are still outside. We have to bring them back, right?" Outside the city, the disciples of the Union Alliance, who were wearing the uniform of the Union Alliance, gathered together. Seeing the city gate open, they rushed back one by one. Coming in with them was a young man who was dressed casually. The most distinctive feature of the young man was his hair. He had short fluffy hair, which seemed to be scattered, but it was like some kind of mysterious pattern, which made Jiang Xin notice this young man. Seeing this young man, Kong Shinmu's expression froze. Not for anything else, but because he had met this young man a few times. When he entered the desolate ancient city, he saw this young man among the many cultivators. At that time, when General Lung Changhong's derivation array exploded in the desolation ancient city, it had a great impact on the city. The cultivators inside had suffered heavy casualties. He didn't expect to see this young man here again. This young man clearly had an impression of Kong Shinmu. As soon as he entered the city, his gaze inadvertently glanced at Kong Shinmu. Bai Yi, how's the investigation going? Reporting to the left protector, we have found Kong Shinmu's whereabouts. The young man called Bai Yu said respectfully. These words did not surprise Kong Shinmu at all. The moment he saw the young man named Bai Yu, he had thought of this ending. Tang Xiaoyu focused his mind. This person was really here for Kong Shinmu. He was a little anxious. Over the past year, although there had been no trace of Kong Shinmu, he had always heard some legends about Kong Shinmu. Although some of the stories were true, the people who spread the news had obviously exaggerated it, causing it to become more and more ridiculous. The thing that left the deepest impression on Tang Xiaoyu was that Kong Shinmu fought with the disciples of the Everlasting Pavilion alone. How should he put it? It sounded unreliable, but with Kong Shinmu's character, he would really do it. Moreover, although the strength that Kong Shinmu showed on the surface was not very good, his actual combat power was very terrifying. It had only been a year, but Kong Shinmu's cultivation seemed to have improved a lot. Where is he? When the left protector asked this, he glanced at Kong Shinmu. That's him. Bai Yu pointed at Kong Shinmu. Are you sure? The left protector smiled meaningfully when he heard this. This subordinate is sure. Bai Yu replied respectfully. Left protector, why are you so hypocritical? Tang Xiaoyu was getting more and more dissatisfied with the left protector. He had already trapped them in the city, but they were still talking about these things. How boring. Tang Xiaoyu, look at you. You already knew that he was Kong Shinmu? Then why did you say that? Aren't you afraid that the United Alliance will put you on the wanted list? The left protector narrowed his eyes and sneered. Left protector, have you stayed in the city for too long that your brain has aged? I have been wanted by the Tianyuan Palace for so many years. Why would I be afraid of being wanted by you? Moreover, you can only put me on the wanted list. Tang Xiaoyu said disdainfully. The left protector knew that Tang Xiaoyu was not lying. They could only put up a wanted list for Tang Xiaoyu. It would take some effort to catch Tang Xiaoyu. Moreover, if the old man from Tang Xiaoyu's hometown was involved, there would be a lot of trouble. This was what the left protector was afraid of. Tang Xiaoyu gave Kong Shinmu a look, and Kong Shinmu immediately understood. Kong Shinmu, Mo Ya, and Tang Xiaoyu. They did not waste any more time with the left protector. They turned around and rushed to the city gate. Realizing this, the left protector immediately cast a spell to close the city gates, but it was still too late. By the time the city gate was closed, Kong Shinmu and the other two had already rushed out of the city. Moreover, the three of them did not show themselves outside the city. It was as if they had disappeared from sight. The left protector was like Hao Yan. He was also good at refining spatial barriers. Unlike Hao Yan's spatial barrier, which was made of the undead flame, the left protector's spatial barrier also contained the heavenly dark flame. Most importantly, the left protector's master was the ancestor of the ancient fire tribe, one of the 4 great ancestral corpse clans. Left protector, what should we do now? Bai Yu glanced in the direction of the city gate and asked. Go after them. The left protector's figure moved and disappeared. Bai Yu cupped his fists respectfully and walked in the direction of the city. The gate of the city was not opened. Bai Yu walked out of the gate of the city and disappeared on the vast road. Tang Xiaoyu had basically familiarized himself with this secret realm in the past year. Unfortunately, he could not find the exit. Brother Jiang, this is a rough map. Tang Xiaoyu drew a simple map of what he had experienced in the past year. He also gave Jiang Shenwu the map of the time he had entered the mystic realm. Brother Tang, if you need anything, please don't hesitate to tell me. Kong Shinmu knew that Tang Xiaoyu had helped them a lot along the way. Now that he had given him an important map, He was very grateful. Actually, I just want to meet my idol. Although Tang Xiaoyu was usually carefree, when it came to his idol, he seemed to have changed into a different person. It was very awkward. Then, who is your idol? As Kong Shinmu asked, many experts that he had met in the past flashed through his mind. First, he excluded the experts from the Demon God clan, the Talisman Water clan, and the Emperor Bat clan. It's Emperor Shi. Tang Xiaoyu scratched his head and said. Kong Shinmu was stunned. Tang Xiaoyu's idol was his master. You want to meet Emperor Shi? Kong Shinmu asked with a smile. Yes, she is my idol. I have always wanted to meet her, but I have never had the chance. Plus, I am always being chased by Big Brother Lien Yi. It is even more difficult. Tang Xiaoyu grinned. Chapter 57-43. Brother Jiang, I accidentally heard that you and Emperor Shi know each other. This is the reason why I got close to you. Tang Xiaoyu did not hide anything from Kong Shinmu. This was indeed the case. Tang Xiaoyu originally treated Kong Shinmu as if he had met an ordinary cultivator. Even if Kong Shinmu had died in the desolate ancient city, he might not have had any reaction. It was only because he accidentally learned that Kong Shinmu knew his idol, Emperor Shi, that he helped him. As a cultivator, Tang Xiaoyu was well aware of the unwritten rules among cultivators. It was taboo for cultivators to ask about each other. Yes. Tang Xiaoyu was so honest that Kong Shinmu did not mind. I can't contact Emperor Shi for the time being. Kong Shinmu's words were true. He had been away for too long. In addition, he had mistakenly entered this moving secret zone. This secret zone led to a whole new world, the Outer Domain realm. He had no chance to go back. He had not seen Emperor Shi for more than a year. He really did not know where Emperor Shi was. Kong Shinmu hid the fact that Emperor Shi was his teacher. Okay, then it won't be too late to tell me when you can contact him. Speaking of this, Tang Xiaoyu seemed to have thought of something. He slapped his forehead. I did not say that I have to ask Brother Jiang to tell me where Emperor Shi is. Tang Xiaoyu worshipped Emperor Shi very much. He really wanted to meet Emperor Shi. At the mention of Emperor Shi, he suddenly did not know how to speak. If I know where he is, I will definitely tell you. Kong Shinmu laughed heartily. It was a good thing that his teacher was respected by others. Okay. Tang Xiaoyu had his own things to do. He also knew that Kong Shinmu and Emoya had their own things to do, so he did not stay any longer. The three of them officially parted ways. He didn't know when they would meet again after this separation. Kong Shinmu and Emoya followed the map provided by Tang Xiaoyu and quickly left this place. The left protector was hot on his heels. According to the information sent back by Hao Yan, Kong Shinmu had seized the Star Atlas Lock in the secret realm of the Immortals' abode. As expected, Kong Shinmu had also cracked the power of magic power that existed on the Star Atlas Lock. The left protector wasn't interested in the Star Atlas Lock, but he was interested in the power of the Star Atlas Lock. Every cultivator who was about to step into the Gate of Laws would be interested in the power of law. Moreover, according to Hao Yan, Kong Shinmu's strength was mediocre a year ago, and his supreme divine power was only at the 8th level. But in just a year, his supreme divine power had grown to the 9th level. What was worth noting was that Kong Shinmu had more than one type of supreme godly power. Each type of supreme divine power was not weak, and they were unpredictable. From this, it could be inferred that Kong Shinmu had also obtained the Star Map Lock, which was the Dharma Seal. Although the left protector had already sensed his own Dharma Seal, his Dharma Seal was still not perfect, and there were still many shortcomings. He needed to perfect his own Dharma Seal, so he needed to devour other Dharma Seals. Only when the Dharma Seal was perfect could he control the power of law. The left protector would not let Kong Shinmu off like this. He controlled the city and caught up to Kong Shinmu. This time, the left protector did not hold back at all, directly ordering all the members of the Alliance in Sealed Abode's abode to capture Kong Shinmu in one fell swoop. Among the many Alliance members, Gu Tianze was included. When Gu Tianze received the left protector's message, he was at the northern end of Sealed Abode's abode. The northern end was an extremely cold region, and there were ice veins everywhere. The reason he was here was because he had followed Grasshopper all the way here. It was said that Grasshopper had found Feng's whereabouts, but Gu Tianze looked at the environment here, as well as the surrounding aura, and determined that it was impossible for Feng to be here. That was true, but he had lost track of Grasshopper. After half a day, he still could not find Grasshopper's whereabouts, and now that he received the Left Protector's message, he was actually very reluctant. Left Protector, what do you want? Gu Tianze asked impatiently. Gu Tianze, where are you? The Left Protector knew that Gu Tianze had entered Sealed's abode purely for fun, and knew that he would not always stay in the same place, so he asked. In the northern end. Gu Tianze said indifferently. In the northern end, not the northernmost territory. In Sealed's abode, there was a certain difference between the northern end and the northernmost territory. Any cultivator could freely enter and exit the northern end, but not the northernmost territory. The northernmost territory was filled with a lot of supreme divine force of nature, but the supreme divine force of nature there was particularly heterogeneous, and it was also filled with non-supreme divine force of nature. Once a supreme cultivator devoured it, not only would he not be able to improve his supreme divine force, but it would also cause the supreme divine force to completely disintegrate and dissipate. In serious cases, it was possible that a supreme cultivator would be buried in that place. As for the non-supreme divine force of nature, no one had yet analyzed what kind of power it was. In the maps made by the predecessors, there were very few descriptions of the northernmost territory. I know, the Left Protector said loudly. With your ability, you can't go to the northernmost territory. But isn't it just the northernmost territory? Why can't I go there? I'm just looking for someone, and I don't have the time to go there. Gu Tianze immediately retorted when his strength was questioned. All right, then can you come over for a while? The Left Protector said. I'm now at the place where we parted. What's the matter? Gu Tianze's tone became extremely impatient again. At this time, there are not many people in the abode who are your match, right? There are. What surprised Gu Tianze was that the Left Protector was very certain. It's a youth called Kong Xinmu. He seems to have supreme spatial power. Supreme spatial power. Gu Tianze exclaimed. Compared to Kong Xinmu, he cared more about supreme spatial power. At that time, he had also seen the supreme spatial power of nature. Unfortunately, the supreme spatial power did not match with his talent power, and he could not devour it at all. When a supreme cultivator devoured supreme divine force, the first requirement was for it to match with their talent power. But it could also not match. Some cultivators' cultivation methods were more special. Even if the supreme divine force devoured did not match with their talent power, they could still devour it. Under such circumstances, the supreme divine force devoured belonged to the natural power, and would exist in the cultivator's soul, consciousness, and sea of consciousness. Once the opportunity came, they could comprehend the supreme divine force, and from there they could use it as their own. Gu Tianze had always been obsessed with the supreme spatial force of nature. He knew that Hao Yan was one of the first cultivators to possess the supreme spatial force. Ever since that incident, the supreme spatial force had become the supreme divine power of a single element. Chapter 57-44. Gu Tianze was no stranger to Kong Xinmu. When he first met Kong Xinmu's supreme divine power was only at the 4th level. He wasn't even worthy to be his opponent. Unexpectedly, in just a year, Kong Xinmu's cultivation had advanced to such a level. What surprised Gu Tianze the most was that Kong Xinmu had comprehended the supreme power of space. This was the supreme divine power that Gu Tianze had always yearned for. However, this was also good. Since Kong Xinmu had obtained the supreme power of space, then as long as he defeated Kong Xinmu, he could directly seize the supreme power of space from him, which would save him a lot of trouble. Wait for me. After Gu Tianze indifferently threw down a sentence, his figure disappeared on the spot. The north end was not far from the Left Protector city. Moreover, Kong Xinmu and Moya were heading towards the north end. For Gu Tianze, it was a good thing. Senior Moya, according to the map, the north end is in front of us. Kong Xinmu had already analyzed the map that Tang Xiaoyu gave him. This map not only marked the location, but also marked the places that needed to be noted in the area. It was like the north end, where one could go to the extreme north territory. The existence of the extreme north territory was equivalent to the forbidden area of this sealed secret territory. Tang Xiaoyu had never been to the extreme north territory, so he wasn't very familiar with it. There was a small line of words on the map, which was Tang Xiaoyu's guess. There was a rumor that said that one could leave the sealed secret territory through the extreme north territory. Whether this was true or not, Tang Xiaoyu didn't dare to confirm. It was the first time that Kong Xinmu and Emoya came to this secret territory, so naturally, they didn't know much about it. To be safe, the two didn't plan to go to the extreme north territory. Thus, when the two realized that it was the north end in front of them, they went around it. The northern area was special. Although it occupied a large area, the entrances and exits were one way. Kong Xinmu and Emoya were aware of the current situation. The left protector would not let them go so easily. Once they entered the northern end, they would definitely be surrounded by the left protector. At that time, they would have no choice but to go to the northernmost weave. Of course, when the two of them went around the north end, they deliberately set up a cover. When they arrived at the northern entrance, the two of them rushed in. Afterwards, Kong Xinmu used the supreme spatial force to bring Emoya out from the other side of the space. The spatial essence of this place was enshrouded in the power of ice, so unless a cultivator was extremely proficient in spatial spell techniques, it would be very difficult to discover this place. Kong Xinmu and Emoya took the opportunity to leave the north end. Closer to the north was a large forest. A year ago, it was a huge forest, but now it had become a desert. In this year, Tang Xiaoyu had passed by this place twice. The first time he saw it, it was still a big forest. The second time he saw it, it had already become a desert. There was a difference of several months between the two times. What happened in these few months? How could such a large forest turn into a desert? Kong Xinmu looked at the desert in front of him with a frown. There doesn't seem to be any energy aura around here, Emoya said as she sensed the space around this desert. The two of them guessed that a great battle had taken place here, and after the battle ended, it became this scene. Then, the strength of the cultivators on both sides became a mystery. The cultivators who entered the secret realm had all reached the Supreme Divine Force level, and many of them had Supreme Divine Force at least the 5th stage. It was naturally not difficult for a 5th stage Supreme Divine Force cultivator to destroy a large forest. However, they only destroyed the forest, and did not affect the area outside the forest. This was the problem. Either the area outside the forest was special, or there was something similar to a spatial barrier. These spatial barriers were not something a 5th stage cultivator could destroy. Moreover, the cultivators of both sides who were fighting had supreme divine powers. They had all reached the 8th level or even higher. In this way, these two cultivators could use their own strength to destroy the spatial barrier around the forest, and even affect a large part of the surrounding secret realm. Based on this analysis, the strength of the two sides was more inclined to the first scenario. Two 5th stage cultivators with supreme divine strength. Why would they not hesitate to fight each other and destroy this great forest? Kong Xinmu, there's something strange in the space ahead. Suddenly, Senior Emoya spoke. Jiang Shenwu raised his head and saw that Emoya had walked into the desert at some point in time. She bent down and grabbed a handful of sand, her expression solemn. Kong Xinmu clearly saw Senior Emoya grab the sand, but the sand quickly disappeared. No matter how much sand Emoya grabbed, the sand would quickly disappear. It seemed that as long as the sand left the sand, it would disappear. Is there something underground? Kong Xinmu suddenly thought of the special mark on the map. Although Tang Xiaoyu did not find anything strange here, when he passed by the northern end, he heard some news from some of the experts there. Therefore there were special marks, but they also reminded him that he had only heard that there was something here, and he did not know the specifics. Kong Xinmu put away the map and released his soul consciousness towards the sand below. However, he did not expect that his soul consciousness would be blocked by some kind of power. Kong Xinmu controlled his soul consciousness to expand forward. His soul consciousness could expand, but it could not go down. Moreover, it could not go down only on this piece of sand. Outside of the sand, his soul consciousness could go down normally. Now, he could basically confirm that there was something below this piece of sand. There was also a power that could block his soul consciousness. If it was related to the soul consciousness, Kong Xinmu only thought of the Supreme Soul Power. Regrettably, ever since he had devoured the Supreme Soul Power, the Supreme Soul Power had not improved at all. It had always maintained its original strength. This made Kong Xinmu think that if he wanted to improve the level of the Supreme Soul Power, he had to devour new Supreme Soul Power. Kong Shin-mu, can you sense the existence of spatial barriers around us? Emoya suddenly asked. Yes. When Kong Shin-mu released his soul consciousness just now, he had already sensed the existence of spatial barriers in the surrounding space. He had first seen spatial barriers in that cave abode, and they had been refined by the flame of dead spirits. Not long ago, he had met the Left Protector. There was also a large area of complex spatial barriers around the Left Protector's city. Other than the flame of dead spirits, there was also the heavenly dark flame. Some of the spatial barriers here only had the flame of dead spirits, some had the heavenly dark flame, and some had the flame of dead spirits and the heavenly dark flame. In short, there were many types of spatial barriers around this space. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.